Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for worship the Mayor and colleagues.
Good morning, everyone. Please can you remain standing for prayers by my chaplain, Father Michael Phillips, before we start the meeting. Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you. Do you know there's a shampoo you can buy called Head and Shoulders? As you can see, I don't have to use it. But we think of St. David at this time of year, and we remember that he was, in effect, head and shoulders above all the rest of his time, and has remained so in the lives of the people of Wales ever since, our patron saint. And so this prayer is offered remembering that fact. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we remember with thanksgiving the life, witness and work of St. David, our patron saint, here in Wales, we remember that you have made all the peoples of the earth to serve thee in freedom and peace. Grant to the people of Wales, and especially the people of this borough, a zeal for justice and tolerance, that we may use our liberty in accordance with thy holy will. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Thank you all.
Please be seated. I'd like to remind you all that this council meeting is being broadcast live on the internet, so we're all on camera. Please be aware that you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking. There is no need for members to stand as cameras are focused on people sitting down. Remember to speak clearly into your microphones, please. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting today, councillors, officers, members of the press and public, anyone else attending from the police. No, we haven't got anyone from the police. Anyone watching via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones be put on silent and other noisy devices also. If there's an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. If we have any motions or amendments during the meeting, I will need them to be clear, please, before we go to the vote. Agenda item 1, attendance. The attendance register is going around the room. Please can all members sign it. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Lead Officer for Council, Richard Gwinnell. Have we had any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We have apologies from Councillor Giles Davis, Councillor Alan Furzer, Councillor Alan Jones, Councillor Neil Mason and Councillor Keith James.
Thank you. Members, are there any other apologies? Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Monitoring Officer Linda Willis, do you have any advice for members, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've had a couple of queries from councillors, and my advice is item 9, setting the budget. I think there are a whole suite of proposals which are going to affect members just as they will affect all residents in the borough, and it's my advice that there are unlikely to be any declarable interests which outweigh the public interest in councillors debating and voting on the whole budget. Item 12, where the proposal is to set up an advisory pensions board. Again, I don't think there are any declarable interests in relation, for example, to those members who sit on our pensions committee. Madam Mayor, I will have some further advice before we deal with item 13, which is the pay policy. But that's advice on the position of chief officers who are affected by that report. So I'll give my advice just before that item, if that's acceptable. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Linda. Members, do you have any other interest to declare? Councillor Thomas?
Item 10, the corporate parenting panel. I am a member of the panel. Do I need to declare an interest?
I think that's a position that you occupy as part of your role, Councillor Thomas, so I don't think it's a declarable interest under the code for this purpose. Thank you.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for clarity again, regarding the Community Council's involvement with the setting of the precept, do we need to declare an interest as dual-added members?
I don't think we declared last year, so I think it's our practice. The precept is what the precept is. So on that basis, we don't normally ask community councillors to declare. But thank you for raising that, Councillor Evans. It makes it clear for members of the public as well as councillors.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We go on to agenda item 4, minutes of the 3rd of February 2015. Can someone move that the minutes are correct? We all agreed? Minutes agreed. Thank you, members. Agenda item 5, update on actions. Members, the updates on what has been done to implement our previous decisions start on page 27 of the agenda. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I draw members' attention to page 21, an entry the 21st of October 2014, which is members' question MQ7. Knowing that today Council will be setting its budget for the forthcoming financial year 2015-16 and having looked to mitigate financial service cuts as much as possible, I would appreciate if Councillor Hunt, Executive Member for Resources and Corporate Governance, would update members in regard to the progress he has made to the following action point: circulate to all members the findings of the analysis to be undertaken of the practice and necessity of printing hard copy documents across the Council, knowing that it came from the entry in October. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that query comes from the updates from the minutes, Councillor Kemp. Oh, no, sorry, my mistake. Right, Councillor Hunt.
The exercise is underway in relation to the review, but has not yet been completed. It will conclude at the end of the current financial year, especially looking at the month 11 and 12 spend, and the complete list of publications and associated costs through 2014-15 will be circulated to all members as per my commitment in October.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Everyone happy to note the updates? Yes? Thank you, members. They're noted. Agenda item 6, receipt of petitions. We have one petition for today. Ray Watkins, can you come down and read out your petition about street lighting and then pass it along to me, please?
I'm Raymond Watkins, and we've got a petition here to turn the street lights back on in Torfaen. The Cabinet in Torfaen Borough Council took the decision to switch off approximately 66% of our street lights in Torfaen. Many elderly are now too scared to go out after dark in fear of trips and falls or being a victim of assault or crime. Family members are increasingly concerned about their elderly relatives. Children's outdoor play is being affected. Residents are feeling increasingly angered about the decision that Labour-led council took. An average street light in Torfaen costs approximately £70 per year to run in energy costs. That £70 is having a sometimes devastating effect on some people's lives. We believe the decision taken by Torfaen Labour's Party Cabinet had little thought on the effect this would have on the people it serves. We understand the need to save money, but not at the expense of the residents' safety and security. We have the undersigned called on Torfaen Council to review its decision to turn our streetlights back on and look into solar timers as the method to save money and energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. The petition contains 1,377 signatures, including 884 online signatures. Are we all happy to refer the petition to the Executive Member for Neighbourhoods for him to investigate, respond and report back as normal? Yes? Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Thank you, Mr. Watkins. We'll move on to agenda item 7, public question time. There are 2 public questions for today shown on the sheet circulated. We call the first question from Bob Jones, please. Would you like to come down and ask your question?
Good morning, Madam Mayor, Chief Exec, Leader, members of the Council. My name is Bob Jones, as you know. I've been a local councillor and I'm also now on a community council looking after Southville in Cwmbran. For a number of years, we have been asking for about a play area in the middle of the estate. This was originally for the young people of the area. Perhaps a lot of you do not know Southville. It's an estate built after the Second World War to bring employment to the area for men and women returning from the war. Employment was set up for such as Girling Lucas, still making aeroplane parts, then later car components. Saunders Valve also made components for aircraft. The parts for milk dairies by Alfa Laval. The stamping works, Cuskeens, who made all kinds of engineering items, and the Avondale Steelworks. Most of these are now gone. But remember, they left their siblings behind. These siblings have now young families and need places to play. Remember, we talked about education, which is good, but also remember a happy child is easier to educate. Also, you and I know from the Prime Minister, the Welsh First Minister, and the press, television and radio, all expressing obesity and diabetes. The schools are taking a beating because they have no time for PE. In the second time, I'm not asking for swings, slides, but a cage where these children can play safely. That's all I'm asking for. Please remember the children. Thank you.
I ask Councillor John Cunningham, Executive Member for Neighbourhoods, to answer this question, please.
Thank you for that, Bob. I think the cage that you are referring to is commonly known as a mugger, a multi-age games area. These costs are approximately £100,000 to £150,000 to install, and unfortunately the Council does not have the budget for such a project. However, the Council would be more than willing to work with the questioner to support them to apply for grant funding from the big lottery or others, for example, as other communities have done, to see if such a facility can be provided.
Okay, Mr. Jones. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Can I ask now Jean Brill of Wynfelin to come down and ask your question, please?
Last year, both Council Leader Bob Wellington and Executive Member for Education David Yowell requested that the users of the adult education centres, Settlement, Cross Killiog and Power Station be engaged and involved in the modelling of options at different levels of grant cut in advance of the expected late notification of the Coleg Gwent Franchise Award. The centre users' consultations, purportedly instigated for the centre users to be engaged and involved in modelling options, were a sham. TCBC admitted that the meetings could not cope with modelling. Do the Council Leader and the Executive Member for Education still require the centre users to be engaged and involved in the modelling of options before the Coleg Gwent Franchise Award for 2015-2016 is formally announced? Alternatively, are the Council Leader and the Executive Member for Education content to make decisions in private and not consult the users as happened last year?
Thank you, Mrs Brill. Can I ask Councillor Dave Yowell, Executive Member for Education, to answer this question, please?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mrs Brill for bringing the question to the Council. However, I must refute the premise upon which the question is predicated. Both the Leader and I would like to thank those people who gave up their personal time to take part in the consultation process. Representatives from each of the 3 ACL centres, all of whom had been chosen by their representative centre user groups, engaged in a planned series of 3 meetings. Prior to the first meeting, all users had been asked for suggestions for savings expressed through suggestion boxes or directly to individual office staff. These were later collated and discussed during the meetings. The Council shared financial information with the consultation group to assist them with understanding the ACL budget. They were also given the quantum of savings that hypothetically might need to be made should a further cut be announced by Coleg Gwent. The combined findings of this exercise have been drafted and will be sent to the consultation group for approval. Once agreed by the group, the findings will form the basis of a discussion between the Deputy Chief Executive Officer and myself. That discussion will also take into account a number of factors outside the ACL service, which will enable me to look at options across a wider range of services. One option is to see if we are able to provide some one-off funding for a further year, so that irrespective of Coleg Gwent's announcement, we are able to provide much more certainty to service users until June 2016. So the consultation process has absolutely not been a sham, as Mrs Brill's question suggests. Neither has the Council at any time suggested that these meetings could not cope with modelling, as Mrs Brill also suggested. However, these consultations are helpful, as they undoubtedly have been. They do not constitute an absolute solution to our financial problems. The cuts mean that funding for ACL seems likely to be unpredictable into the foreseeable future. This means that, as well as views and opinions from users, we will also need to consider the wider interest of taxpayers and whether it is appropriate for us to continue to replace year on year the funding that we lose, and it may well be that we will have to consider the need to make more fundamental changes. This will be a very complex exercise and will need to take other service budgets into account. This is our job as members and not one for users of a particular service. It must be said that Mrs Brill's assertion that last year the Council took decisions in private and that we didn't consult with users is also palpably wrong. At the end of April 2014, we were told of the level of the cuts from Coleg Gwent. This information was embargoed for 2 weeks, while Coleg Gwent consulted with their own staff, these cuts having serious implications for them as well. Consequently, we were left in the invidious position of having to balance the budget to take effect from the beginning of the academic year in September in order to make the necessary savings by the beginning of the financial year the following April. During this small window of opportunity, we arranged for the following consultation process. 16th of May, Torvey and County Borough Council, ACL, were advised of cuts and curriculum impact. Centre users and learner meetings were held on Tuesday the 20th of May at Crossy Kellogg, Wednesday the 21st of May at the Settlement, Thursday the 22nd of May at the power station. On the 1st of July, redundancy consultation commenced with affected ACL staff. Also on July the 1st, letters were sent to ACLs informing them of changes that affected clubs, rooms and bookings, etc. This year we wanted to give users more time to come up with ideas and suggestions for consideration by the Council should further cuts be necessary. I have been kept informed about the progress of this group and am confident that a worthwhile exercise has been undertaken and that these deliberations, once ratified by the group, will prove to be of value to our decision making. However, it must be understood that, unpalatable as it might be, we need to recognise that our ACL in its current form is unlikely to be financially sustainable within its existing budget. Evidently, a minority view exists within the consultation group, a minority view perhaps predicated on an expectation of the process which appears to be at variance with the majority. This is regrettable. Also regrettable was an article in the Argus that retailed the claim about the consultation process being a sham. This was not only offensive to the majority view, but unhelpful in the interests of cooperation. We do, nevertheless, remain committed to this process. An update on the Council's position will be issued to the consultation group following receipt of the report and once the funding levels have been announced.
Mrs. Brill, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I'd like to make several corrections to David Yowell's statement. He said that the user group shared financial information.
Sorry, Mrs. Brill, can you make it a supplementary question? Has to be a question.
Could you ask Councillor Yowell to actually give us the true facts, because what he has just reported are not the facts. The consultations were a sham. The figures that were shared with us were not the Coleg Went franchise figures. The percentage cuts that were looked at were not the 10-20% cuts that David Yowell requested. The sum total of the consultation meetings, bearing in mind that we're supposed to be dealing something of the magnitude of £200,000 to £300,000, the sum total came to £9,000.
I understand your concerns, but the process is you have to ask a question, not make a statement. I'm sorry. So can you just make...
Well, the question is, when are we going to have the true consultation meetings and not the sham that I can justify that has been existing so far?
Councillor Yowell?
Well, my swift answer to that is that the information that I've just read out is the position at the moment. This is the information that I've discussed with officers. They are confident that this information and the answer that I've just read out is absolutely true. And further to that, that the position that Mrs. Brill is presenting isn't necessarily one shared by the rest of the consultation group. I remain confident that the answer that I gave in the substantive question remains the true position, and I have nothing more to say at this time on the matter.
Thank you, Mrs. Brill. We'll move on to agenda item 8 now, announcements. Leader, do you have any announcements today, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, but before I make my announcement, I'd like to give the Deputy Leader an opportunity to make an announcement.
Yeah, thanks for that. As a governor at Pontnewydd Junior School, I've been contacted by the head teacher to ask if I would make all the council aware of recent successes of the school. There have been 3 recent successes. First one, pupils were awarded...
Point of order, Madam Mayor. The agenda does say notifications from the leader and the CEO.
Repeat that, because I don't know whether other members understood it, but I didn't.
Number 8, on your agenda, announcements, to receive any announcements from the leader or chief executive.
Yeah, that's right. And on many occasions, since you've been on the council, we've allowed Other members, well, John Cunningham have done it on a number of occasions. The previous director, the previous cabinet member for education have done it. So I'm asking the deputy leader to make an announcement, Madam Mayor.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, and there have been rare instances, but that usually is through the Mayor and allowed by the Mayor. That is the respectful thing to do.
I think, under these circumstances, I'm going to allow it because it's to do with a local school in the borough and young children, so I hope all members support me with allowing. Yes? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if everybody's happy, I'll start again. Item 1, pupils were awarded first place in the primary category for the e-safety competition. It's a competition run by South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board. And has also won the overall award, which means the school won first place when judged against secondary schools and youth club entries. The pack the children produced will be distributed to all schools in Wales. The second competition was pupils have been awarded first place in the South Wales anti-bullying campaign. And the third project, pupils will be representing Wales for the third time at the UK Formula 1 finals at the NEC in Birmingham on the 10th and 11th of March, and have been recognised by Engineering and Education for South Wales for their outstanding achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'd like to start off by congratulating yourself on making an announcement on litter picking throughout the borough. I'd like to inform members of an event where around 100 people took part in a multi-agency-led community clear-up at the Byways Estate in Cwmbran on Friday the 20th of February, organised by the Mayor, Mandy Owen. Local residents lent their support to representatives from South Wales Fire and Rescue, Torring Council, Gwent Police, Bronavon, the Probation Service, National Resources Wales, Keep Wales Tidy and Cwmbran Community Council. This really was a multi-agency exercise. Several tons of... Is somebody asking me a question? Sorry. Several tons of rubbish was collected during the day, while items such as mattresses, furniture and televisions were cleared from a nearby wood and riverbank. The whole area can only be described as pristine. As part of the Action Day, representatives from the Council and Bronavon also spent time knocking doors and speaking to residents about waste and recycling issues, and representatives from the Fire Service knocked doors to discuss fire safety with residents. Sadly, it beggars belief that less than 48 hours after a wonderful exhibition of community pulling together, another mattress had been dumped in the ravine. I think this is a huge educational thing that we need to find some resources to address. I'd like also to put on record my thanks to the many groups around the borough taking action to target litter and fly tipping. There are an enormous number of groups throughout the borough that collect in refuge, and have been ever since I've been on the council. And I'll go through some of them, and I'm sure I've missed people out. If I have, I apologise. The Lyndon Moxon litter champion covers the canal and cycle track in Sebastopol. Claire Pierce Crawford volunteers who look after the British and new houses at Pantegasic. Friends of Glansacan Park, who carry out litter picking and planting events within the park. Charles Street Neighbour Friends Group that look after the green and surrounding area. Poddybull Park Friends Group carry out various projects and maintenance within the park. Bronwyn Davis litter champion. The milk ladies that used to look after the wooded areas at Fair Hill in Cwmbran, which myself and a number of councillors have been out over the years with them. The Larks, I think it's Larks, that look after the Oakfield Gardens, carrying out various projects and litter picking in Llantarnam Ward. The Commoners Association, Penrow, has carried out litter picks along the mountain road, and they do it on an ad hoc basis. The Angela Lott St Giles Group carries out various litter picks. Cwmbran Environmental Awareness that carry out various clean-ups in the Fairwater area and the wider area of Cwmbran. The Neil White Cwmynyscoy Group and the Neil Mason in Woodlands Field. So there are many groups that collect litter and have been doing for the last 30 years, to my knowledge. What we need to do... Well, So what we need to do, Mayor, are you going to allow this?
No, Mr Banfield. I'm sorry, can you keep quiet while we... Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. I'm one of Terry's biggest fans, by the way. And I apologise to any group I missed. Somehow we need to harness the fantastic community spirit so often shown by these hard-working groups in the community. I'll be proposing we hold a member seminar with the Waste Service to consider how we can strategically support community groups and the service to tackle hotspots across the borough. One option I'll be bringing forward is that we could all provide money from our small schemes to bulk purchase equipment such as pickers, bags and various other stuff used by community groups, and work with the Wales Keep Wales Tidy group to organise it. I'm surely collectively there'll be many ideas that will emerge out of that seminar, how we can coordinate and organise it on a more strategic basis in the same way. And I'm not deriding any of the other groups, but this was the best thing I've ever seen because it was organised on a multi-agency basis. This is a really good exercise. But along with that, we've got to educate the public. Let me just say, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, I was raised in a valley town, in a street. And my mother's responsibility, every day, like every mother's responsibility, was to tidy that patch between her house and the next house. And that was done automatically, no questions asked. That don't happen today. People today are quite happy to live in their houses and have litter right adjacent to it. It's a massive educational issue that we have to deal with, both in the schools and with the community. That's it, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Can I just say on that, the multi-agency day is hopefully going to be a template which will be rolled out to other problem areas throughout the borough. It's still in its early days, but hopefully it will be moved on. Okay, thank you. Chief Executive, do you have any announcements?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We move on to agenda item 9, Budget 2015-16 and the Medium-Term Financial Plan. Nigel Aurelius, Assistant Chief Executive for Resources, can you present your report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Each year the budget process for this and all councils gets more difficult. The impact of the reductions in funding from both the UK and the Welsh Government is both acute and severe. We're no longer playing at the margins, and reductions of the scale we're being asked to achieve are requiring fundamental choices and very difficult decisions. Efficiencies and trying to do things in a smarter and less costly way will always be part of our approach, but these alone are not going to bridge the funding gap. This is no longer a case of doing more for less. Going forward, we are going to be doing much less. Many commentators think that we're only halfway through this period of austerity, which is already the most sustained we have experienced. And if that is the case, and structural reform remains a way off, then all in the chamber should be concerned about that position. As a small authority that has already had to achieve a lot by way of service savings in recent years, we will simply not be able to deliver upon the demands made of us if we continue to face cash reductions of 4% per annum. It is clear that Welsh Government are prioritising health, which comes at the expense of local government funding. I still believe, as I said this time last year, that all the evidence points towards social care and community services which are aimed at early intervention as being one of the keys to improving health outcomes and ultimately the pressure on the health service. The expectations upon us from citizens, service users, legislation and regulators continues to rise and is at odds with the reality of the funding scenario we are facing. So we must work harder at communicating that message. I refer in the early part of my report to local government being in the teeth of the funding storm, and that is exactly how it feels to me. I also make a comment that if this is not appreciated and our funding outlook does not change, then very soon social care and schools will take up all of our available funding and start to crowd everything else out. It is one of the reasons why this authority submitted an expression of interest in voluntary merger. I know that is a very gloomy place to start my budget speech, and is very similar to ones I've said in the past few years, and probably more dire than previous years. But that is how it feels. I hope, though, it's not a surprise to anyone in this chamber. There may be a debate about where those decisions and where those choices fall, but I'm sure everyone appreciates the severity of the situation. Over the last week or 10 days, many councils in Wales have been announcing their budgets, the common themes being difficult and in a lot of cases controversial choices, services reducing and ceasing, and council tax rising more than in recent times. So this is the context for our budget. This is a set of circumstances is not something that is unique to Torfaen, but all councils in Wales. The reports on the agenda represent the final part of the democratic process to set the budget. It's a process that started well in advance. It has been considered by Cabinet as well as member seminars. This year the mitigations were again developed early in the budget cycle and were again the subject of joint scrutiny and review as a total package through a joint overview and scrutiny committee on the 19th of November. Once again, this proved to be a pivotal meeting within the budget cycle where members could scrutinise over a long period of time the whole package of proposed mitigations and make recommendations to the Executive. I will cover these recommendations when I get to that part of the agenda. You have in the agenda papers a covering report, then a detailed budget report as Appendix 1, which itself has 6 annexes. I'll use that budget book report, which starts on page 45, and then return to the covering report and the statutory recommendations, changes to our minimum revenue provision policy and treasury management. The background and national picture will be well known to all members, and I have already covered much of it. Paragraph 4.3 makes the point that funding is only one side of the equation and draws out the other things that impact upon our budget and ultimately the decisions you as members have to make. Paragraph 4.4 comments on structural reform and the destabilising impact the current uncertainty is having and the impact it has on long-term planning. The last paragraph of that section, 4.7, comments upon the reduction in senior management costs that the Council has made, 25%, and continues to make with the non-filling of the vacancy left by the former Chief Officer for Neighbourhoods. Section 5 of the report, which starts on page 48, briefly outlines the final revenue settlement for Torfaen. Torfaen received a 4.1% like-for-like cash reduction, which equates to more than £5.5 million. Other notable points: the outcome agreement is still distributed, but the message around performance improvement are firmer, and in my opinion there has to be a risk in respect of this grant for future years. We are still awaiting information around some Torfaen specific grant allocations. There are a number of transfers in and out of the settlement. Council tax remains a matter for local policy choice, and the Minister has instigated a review of administration or support services costs in all authorities. There are no forward indications of funding beyond the current year. As I have already said, this is a very difficult settlement for all local authorities, and Torfaen, which is made worse when reductions in specific grant allocations will work their way through. The 14 paragraphs then of section 6, which begin on page 50, really articulate the budget for 15-16. 6.1 outlines the roadshows that took place in autumn/early winter. 6.2 makes the point that the impact of any reduction cannot fall evenly if protections for schools and social care are followed. Of our net budget for the current year, these two areas equate to some 96 million, which would only leave 51 million to shoulder the main burden of the reductions. It's an important point. Overall reductions of the magnitude we are facing are difficult, but are made more so by the impact of protection or hypothecation. 6.3 and 6.4 indicates the targets we set for services and what those resulted in money terms, and 6.5 indicates that the initial estimates were prepared which showed a significant gap to the likely funding available as a result of loss of funding and pay price and demand inflation. 6.6 outlines the engagement with the Policy Development Forum, their policy decisions and direction, and points towards Annex 2, which contains the full list of mitigations. These have been in the public domain since November and were discussed in full at the joint meeting of all scrutiny committees. I need to point to a correction in the wording on page 70. Saving SCH2, the wording still says remove, whereas it should, following the joint scrutiny, say reduce. The numbers, though, reflect the correct position. 6.7 takes us through the corporate measures that were implemented to assist the overall position. These are self-explanatory. 2 I will pick out. The increase in assumed collection rate to 99%. It's not so long ago that our budget was built on an assumed collection rate of 95% for council tax. We will be amongst the highest in Wales on assumed collection, and corporate accommodation, a further 100,000 from our move from police headquarters, which was the last part of our move from the relocation of County Hall. Paragraph 6.8, the first one, apologies, I seem to have two paragraph 6.8s, is a large section which covers off the 12 scrutiny recommendations which were considered by the Executive. Recommendation in 1 in particular has made an impact upon the mitigations, with changes funded from a reduction in senior management capacity. And I've already commented on the need to amend the narrative in the mitigations on page 70. The second, 6.8, outlines some base budget support for social care, and in particular 2 demand management teams, which will be essential to them achieving their mitigations, as well as some support for the continuation of the Highways Local Government Borrowing Initiative scheme that was previously funded by the Welsh Government. 6.9 pulls it all together in a summary table with the full estimates contained within the budget book at Annex 3. The paragraph also makes the point that social care is still protected relative to other services, with a less than 2% reduction. 2% was our budget policy target, whereas services such as the SRS, resources and strategic services were contributing much more. And this is further evidence that our policy is to try and reduce support services more than the front line. 6.10 takes us through an issue within neighbourhoods that needs to be managed, arising from a reducing capital programme and the need to manage the loss of capital fees that they would have earned on capital programmes in a way that is fair to the front line. 6.11 and 6.12 then ask for one-off reserve support as bridge finance to avoid those funded from grant being made redundant when successor grant schemes are likely and those skills will be needed again. This is an example of good use of reserves, but more on reserves later. Members will be aware that this Council has always tried as far as possible to avoid compulsory redundancies by undertaking a voluntary redundancy trawl, and as noted in 6.13, that is again the case this year, and final decisions are still being taken from a business case perspective, and that is both financial and service. The Wales Audit Office recently published a report on this area, and local government came out very positively in that national report, with a lower average cost and a far earlier payback than many other public bodies, including both the Welsh Government and the Wales Audit Office. 6.14 deals with a difficult and always controversial aspect of council tax. The increase for 2015-16 is proposed at 4.75%, which is higher than for a number of years. It's not appropriate to simply compare council tax increases to inflation. The rate of national inflation is not the key driver in terms of our cost pressures. The trend in Wales for 2015-16 is for higher council tax increases, and our proposal is not the highest in Wales or the former Gwent area. In recommending 4.75%, members are trying to balance the desire to protect services and the impact upon household budgets. The Minister wrote to all councils for their plans in relation to council tax increases and indicated that he would use his capping powers if he considered any were excessive. This council replied to that letter and have heard nothing since. The CTRS in Wales, that's the former council tax benefit, but the council tax reduction scheme, which remains at 100%, means those with the most difficulty are cushioned. Of nearly 41,000 taxpayers, nearly 10,600 receive some assistance in Torfaen. In England, where there's been a more patchwork approach to council tax reduction, council tax debt is now a significant issue. Section 7 then takes us on to capital, and there's little to pick out here other than we have maintained the Highways Local Government Borrowing Scheme at our cost, not Welsh Government's, and our 21st Century Schools programme, which will really take off in 2015-16 with some new and remodelled schools starting. At the moment, the funding plan, which was put in place a few years ago to deliver 21st Century Schools, is holding and is down to the discipline shown by the Council in earmarking and holding capital receipts for 21st Century Schools. I'll now move on to reserves and risks. The Minister for Public Services has recently written to all leaders requesting details of the reserves held and their purpose. We replied to that letter. Personally, I have no problem with the increased scrutiny and challenge upon reserve levels. What I do have a problem with is the rather simplistic conclusions that tend to be made, or the inference is given that the level of reserves is somehow the answer to the reductions in funding. It shows a lack of understanding of the reason for holding balances in the first place. Local government has a finance regime that says we have to be financially sustainable and meet our challenges and obligations from the funding available to us. Unforeseen events, emergencies, pressures and overspends we have to fund. There is no bailout resource available to us as there is in other sectors. We spend in gross terms, just revenue, some 262 million per annum, or roughly 22 million per month if our spend was even throughout the year. The table in 8.2 on paragraph 6 on page 62 indicates that in total we were expecting to have reserves of around 13.9 million at the end of 2014-15. Now that figure may move as we close down our accounts and in all likelihood will rise, but it will still represent a sum that is much less than it costs to run Torvine for a month. The pure general fund figure is just over 4 million, which would keep us going for about a week. I am not trying to exaggerate or be emotive, but it is important to put our reserve levels into some kind of context. The Minister for Public Services recently issued a statement on reserves. It followed the letter that I have just referred to. Within that statement, it once again generalises rather than responds to individual authorities. There are some themes in there about openness, transparency, oversight by members and the percentages against gross expenditure of the reserves held. The figures within the link to that announcement are based upon 2013-14 whole-of-government accounts figures. The figure quoted for Torvine at that time was 31.1 million, but that includes over £10 million that is being held as capital for 21st century schools. That said, even on that basis, only 3 authorities in Wales had lower combined reserves than Torvine, Monmouthshire, Merthyr and Anglesey. And our earmark reserves equate to only 2.5% of gross expenditure and are general or unallocated to 3.7% of gross expenditure. In terms of openness and transparency, members and Cabinet are well cited on our reserves. They are clearly articulated within our statutory accounts, and I make regular reference to our financial standing and reserves within Cabinet reports on finance and monitoring. We have in place a reserves policy, which not all authorities do, and our approvals from reserves also have to be done through the Executive Member for Resources and Corporate Governance. They are also a feature of our budget reports. In my opinion, the figures are never hidden, clearly articulated, and we are always open about them. The section of the report on risks and reserves clearly highlights where we expect to be and the risks we are facing. The section also makes it clear it excludes the impact of the revision to our minimum revenue provision policy, which I'll come back to. And also makes the point that should our revenue outturn position allow, we will undertake further rationalisation of reserves and bolstering as appropriate, in particular in relation to our reserve to support redundancy, workforce change and insurance. In 8.2, the table outlines our reserve levels, and in 8.5, I bring out a number of risks we are facing. The last substantive section of that report, 9, details our updated medium-term financial plan. It is based upon an assumption that the current Welsh Government squeeze will continue and also factors in demand pressures and the UK change around pension funds, where the local government pension scheme will lose its protected status, which will cost us in national insurance to the tune of around £2 million. The table in 9.1 shows we are facing a further 30 million of financial challenges over the next 3 years, and some of the ways we will be exploring to try to address it. In concluding that part of the budget, no one would suggest that 15-16 budget is easy and that difficult choices have not been required that will naturally cause concern and have an impact in communities. We need to remember, though, that the requirement to make those decisions and choices has come from central governments in the choices they have to make, the choices they have made. We cannot ignore these choices as we have to set a legal budget that balances. The key messages in respect to 15-16 are a difficult funding position, a budget with more risk than previously, protection for schools and still relative protection for social care, mitigations that have been the subject of joint scrutiny. We're continuing the Highways Local Government Borrowing Scheme, support for 21st century schools, and a council tax increase of 4.75%. I now refer you back to page 33, which is the covering report. The first part of that report takes members through the budget and council tax, which I have already highlighted in talking you through Appendix 1 and the annexes. Appendixes 2 and 3 are simply the property bandings and council tax for each band. Section 7 on page 37 indicates the equality impact assessments, the detail of which is contained in Appendix 4. Section 8, pages 37 to 41, then details a proposed change to our minimum revenue provision policy, which has already been considered by the Audit Committee. The proposal is to reduce our minimum revenue provision for supported borrowing from 4% to 3%, and the reasons why we consider that to still be prudent are detailed. The section also brings out that both our external auditors and Welsh Government have been consulted on the proposals. It has been considered twice by the Audit Committee, the last time being on the 18th of February. There was a great deal of challenge, discussion and debate around the proposal, and they agreed for it to be recommended to Council, but by a majority, not unanimous decision. And the conclusions of the committee are summarised in 8.17. It needs to be acknowledged that we will be the first council in Wales to do this. The report outlines that this change will give us revenue benefit for 2014-15, which will go into reserves and not be used until the audit of the accounts for that year is concluded and everything is fully signed off. The change therefore forms no part of the 15-16 budget, but will be available if everything goes well with the formal audit process for the 2016-17 budget. The last part of the report 9 deals with the Treasury management and prudential indicators, and these have all been through Audit Committee. Included as Appendix 5 is our Treasury management strategy and prudential indicators. The detailed recommendations of approving the overall budget and setting the council tax start on page 42. Part 1 asks you to approve the budget. Part 2 are the statutory recommendations arising from the budget, our increase of 4.5% and those of the police and community councils. Part 3 relates to the proposed changes to our minimum revenue provision, and Part 4 relates to our Treasury management guidelines and prudential indicators. Just to conclude, I want to put on record some thanks to all my colleague chief officers and their teams for their support in developing another difficult budget. It is very much appreciated, and collective responsibility has always been a real strength of this organisation. David Lilly and all my finance colleagues, I would not have a budget to present without their support and endeavour, or without the leadership that David provides across all aspects of financial management and standards for this council on your behalf. Richard Edmonds and his colleagues in strategic services in terms of the comms, the road shows, all the democratic stuff that has to be done, and the scrutiny teams. In respect of this latter point, I believe the joint scrutiny process that was introduced for the 14-15 budget has significantly improved the challenge to the budget proposals and has resulted in changes to the mitigations going forward. It would be important that we build upon that in future budget rounds. I read a finance article that was entitled "Scrutiny is not a nice to have, but it's a must have." So my last thanks goes to all those colleagues instrumental in our scrutiny process, and particularly the architect of much of that, Lynn Williams. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Before we open it up to members, I'd like to ask Executive Member for Resources, Anthony Hunt, do you want to come in?
Before you do that, Madam Mayor, I'd like to lend my support to Nigel's views, which he just expressed. I did inform Richard of this prior to the meeting. This has been a collective venture. It's very difficult setting budgets. We've been working on it for 6 to 8 months. I want to congratulate all of Nigel's team, and indeed all the other directors that have worked hard and had to make some very difficult decisions in terms of setting their budgets, decisions which many of them didn't want to make. And most importantly of all, I'd like to thank Anthony Hunt, who've managed this whole process along with Nigel and worked together very closely. You'd never have got to a budget if that collaboration hadn't taken place. So I agree with everything that Nigel says. Well done.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Leader. First, a word of thanks to Nigel and all those who contributed to this process, including his officers, other chief officers, cabinet members and all the councillors who extended the very thorough joint scrutiny committee on the budget. Nigel's position in the authority, I think, is particularly key in times like this. It's good that we have a Section 151 officer who's got authority within the council and who's listened to, and I think that's key. The thank you is especially pertinent this year, as it's not been a pleasant task. Cutting money from council services is not what any of us got into local politics to do. But this is the reality of life in councils the length and breadth of Britain under this government. I say that because it sometimes feels in this chamber as though some people feel that it's a dilemma we face in Torvine alone, as if it's our own making. It's not, as can be seen by the difficult, controversial decisions that have been faced in council chambers far and wide. The statistics are stark. £1.5 billion less to spend in public services in Wales than when David Cameron became Prime Minister. That means nearly £6 million less in cash again this year to spend on local services for this council alone. My message today could not be more stark, and I won't apologise for being political, because if the budget for local services isn't political at a time like this, then what on earth is? Because this government is endangering the very future of local services, the very future of the services which hold our communities together. To the Welsh Government, I'll repeat my plea that I made at Cabinet. We thank them for the protection they have given us and recognise that they too are in an unenviable situation with their budget being cut from above. But I would ask them to recognise that we are swimming together against the same tide and that local services are not threatened because of what councils have or haven't done, but because of a regressive Westminster government pulling the rug from under local services. It's sometimes said by ministers that local government should prepare for austerity, but that's exactly what we've been doing for several years now. We've made around £40 million of savings by being more efficient, doing things differently and cutting costs. The public are quite right to expect that and they're right to expect that we'll continue to strive in that way. But these kind of savings have their limit, and so as budgets become harder and harder to set as the years go by, especially for anyone who values local services, believes in social justice and wants to protect the most vulnerable in our society. Now, there are some who suggest that there are easy answers, that there are things that councils could do to solve the financial dilemma we face. I wish they were right. Does anyone really think we enjoy taking tough decisions like this? But the trouble is, their easy answers are false answers, fig leaves to hide the fact they don't have an alternative plan to address the realities of Tory cuts. Unfortunately, the only alternative to this dismal future that austerity offers is not within this council's gift. Local services desperately need a government in Westminster that recognises the need for growth, values public services and puts fairness at the heart of the economy. A government that is prepared to tackle tax avoidance by the super-rich and make those with the broadest shoulders take their share of the burden. Until we have a UK government that is prepared to do that and reject the when you're in a hole keep digging school of economics, we just have to make the most of a bad situation. It's not as if we expect the earth. Instead of taking £6 million away from us this year, the effect if local government was given a cash freeze would be enormous. Now that would still represent a real terms cut, but the nearly £6 million extra that would give us would mean we can consider giving more protection to the services most vulnerable people rely on, like social care, spending more on much needed road repairs, for example, freezing council tax for residents, and implementing the living wage and other ways of giving the staff who work hard to deliver local services a better deal. It is thanks to the decisions of the UK government that we are not able to do these things. What we were able to do, however, as part of this budget is listen to local residents. We ran the most comprehensive budget process we ever have run this year, online, using the media and holding meetings. That can be built upon for future years, but it has informed the budget this year too. People said they value schools, social care, highways and refuse collection most highly. We have listened and tried to give these areas relative protection in our budget. We tried to avoid closing services like libraries and tried to protect areas like youth services that we feel are particularly important for the future of our area. The focus is inevitably on where savings are made rather than where we've managed to avoid them, but we've listened to concerns of Joint Scrutiny Committee around payments to foster carers and looked after children, for example, and managed to use a saving in senior management salaries to minimise this cut. We've managed to honour the Welsh Government's pledge on protecting school funding and protected capital spending on schools even at the tightest of financial times. We've cut the cost of senior management wherever possible, taking out a number of posts in recent years. As Nigel said, the cost of senior management in this council is now 25% lower than it was, meaning fewer cuts to frontline services. However, the magnitudes of cuts needed over the last few years cannot be solved just by having fewer senior managers or indeed by having fewer councillors. The savings we need to make this year alone are over 10 times more than the cost of all councillors put together. So anyone who tells you this would solve the problem is selling a false choice. We have used reserves and corporate measures like adjusting our assumed collection rate appropriately to limit the amount of cuts needed from service areas. But again, anyone who tells you that reserves can solve the funding gap facing councils is selling another false choice. Now, Terry and his colleagues are right I defend the right of Terry and his colleagues to oppose and protest. However, to fail to set a legal budget is yet another false choice. It would have dire consequences for the people who rely on our services and the people who work for us. The document that Terry handed out suggested that we're embracing austerity today. I don't embrace austerity any more than I embrace when it's raining, but I don't have the power to change the weather. This is not a game, it's about people's jobs, people's services and people's lives, and that's not something I'm prepared to play political games with. Okay. Indeed, the sign you held up says that the boss of Lloyds Bank has a bonus of £11.5 million. Now, if he'd volunteered to give that to Torvine to help us run local services, I'd take that gladly, but I don't think that's going to happen. Our judgment today is that we strike the right... The ultimate false choice, of course, is sold to people about council tax, that we should somehow freeze council tax regardless of big cuts from the government, and somehow services will not be affected. No council likes raising council tax. I understand how difficult it is for hard-pressed residents, but anyone proposing a council tax freeze today should say where they'd make nearly £2 million of extra cuts from local services. Over the past 4 years, if we'd have frozen council tax, the budget for local services would now be £4.7 million lower. Our judgment today is that we've struck the right balance and that a council tax freeze would mean huge extra cuts, and that would result in services closing and communities suffering. This is, unfortunately, the reality of life under a Tory government making cuts. Local people end up paying more for less as our grant for local services reduces and demand goes up. Now, I'd like to close with a word about a group of people who should not be forgotten in this: the hard-working, loyal staff who are dedicated to providing the local services that people rely on. I appreciate the impact that continual cuts have on them. They've had repeated pay freezes to see their wages effectively going down. They have to work in an ever more pressurised environment as staff numbers fall and expectations rise. Now remember, these aren't the well-paid pen pushers in suits that some in the media like to portray. Our average member of staff is paid something like £18,000. They work long and hard to protect our most vulnerable residents, take care of our children in our schools, keep our community safe and clean, and so on. In return, as Nigel has said, we should continue to strive to minimise the impact of budget cuts on them. It is those staff and those they provide services to that we should keep in mind as we pass this budget today. So I recommend this budget to you as the best way to steer a course through the choppy waters of austerity, and again ask national politicians to realise the impacts of such severe austerity on our public services and on the fabric of our communities. There has to be a better way.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I'm going to open it up now to members for any questions or comments. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you.
Mr Banfield, can you please stop shouting out? Thank you.
Thank you.
If you keep on, Mr Banfield, we're going to have to ask you to leave. I'm sorry, because you're disrupting the meeting. Okay, Councillor Haynes, would you like to carry on with your question? Right, thank you, Mr Banfield. You may leave now. Councillor Haynes, would you like to carry on with your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can't you tell there's an election looming? The Independent Group have had a number of discussions and meetings and have asked many questions of officers, particularly of the Chief Finance Officer and his team. We'd firstly like to thank them for their assistance and support. Year on year, the budget cuts forced on this council by both the UK and Welsh Government are getting more difficult to manage. Whilst it is easy to push the blame onto both the UK and Welsh Governments, those elected to run this council are also under scrutiny. The Independent Group understand that government cuts are forcing councils to make decisions, and the job of this council's cabinet and majority party are to propose areas to save that money. How this council then decides how it spends its reducing budgets from the UK and Welsh Government is vitally important. Our residents see increased charges and fees while some of the services they rely on continue to reduce.
Goodbye. Thank you. Carry on, Councillor Haynes. Carry on.
Thank you. Whilst there is the naive expectation from some quarters for a small group of opposition councillors to formulate a whole alternative budget, we all know that a full alternative budget is not practical or doable without access to and the use of the whole team of officers. It would also be more work for officers and staff to do within a decreasing team. We believe that there is not a single person in this room that is comfortable with all of the proposed measures in this document. The Independent Group have some comments and an amendment to bring forward. Firstly, the Independent Group would like to ask the following questions and make the following observations. The Independent Group believe that the introduction of charges for van permits is a false economy. The report itself suggests that there will be a 50% reduction in requests for van permits. That waste will go elsewhere. We believe this decision would dramatically increase fly tipping and would do nothing more than increase fly tipping clear-up costs. The proposed council tax increase is a difficult pill to swallow. In 4.7 on page 48, it states that around 25% has been saved in senior posts. Please could you quantify that percentage? SCH1, the £100,000 cut and redesign of disabled children's services. We're really concerned to hear that Torfaen are apparently pulling out of the dedicated children's service in Newport and integrating our disabled children's services into the disabled adult service. Can this be confirmed as accurate, please? In the section SCH, there are various saving measures listed, and the Independent Group are very concerned on the impact of people on bed blocking and on relationships with partner agencies. NBH2, the £50,000 reduction of the maintenance budget for street lighting, hugely concerned over this. Broken lights that are broken for longer. Surely that puts the council at an increased risk of litigation. In CSU 1, 3, 9 and 10, the end column of all of those, are the figures available for the employment implications now, please? Because they're listed as to be confirmed. And the last question we have, or statement, SSU 5. This section has already seen quite a heavy reduction in staff numbers over the last 4 years. Are these voluntary redundancies, as the report does not say? So moving on to the amendment.
Councillor Haynes, would it be easier to deal with the questions and then deal with the amendment after?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Nigel, do you want to come in now? Or?
There's a lot of questions in there that I was struggling to write them all down, and I'm obviously going to have to call on some colleagues to assist with at least one or two of them. In terms of the van permits, I mean that was raised by joint scrutiny as a concern. That concern is reflected in the report. The Cabinet did consider that concern and then did decide to stick with the original proposal. In terms of council tax, I think that was just a comment. I think. In terms of the quantification of senior management time, the 25%, the monetary sum will be over £500,000, which is already built into the budgets because it's over a number of years. Give me 2 seconds. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Would it be easy if we had an adjournment for 10 minutes while we got to
You're probably talking over 10 people. In terms of the disabled children's services, I think it would probably be better if Sue commented on that, and in terms of the wider comment around social care savings. And while Sue's doing that, the other ones were the maintenance budget on streetlights, just so that I can get that question. And then the employment numbers. Can you read the savings numbers out so I can just look at those?
They were all, they were CSU 1, 3, 9 and 10, the last column along each of those.
Okay, thanks.
Shall I come in and answer the two social care ones now? While Nigel's looking up some of the other information. The first one was related to the redesign of Children with Disabilities service. What that is about is a change of office space and management oversight. So we'll still have dedicated social workers who have specialist knowledge and expertise on looking after children with disabilities. There will be no change to those children south of the borough to access the Sereni facility. That's a health facility that will continue. Health appointments will continue there. This is purely about reducing management costs and administrative and other support costs by combining those two teams. So you'll in effect have one manager who's managing both a children's social work team and an adult social work team. But they'll have two, the officers working there will have those specialists. The Chief Exec and myself met with the trustee and family member of Sereni last week. We explained our rationale and they went away quite happy with our rationale. There won't be any disruption to the service. The second one then in related to bed blocking, yes, you're right, that is a concern and it's something we've worked hard in Torfaen for over many years. What we're hoping will happen is, as part of the intermediate care fund that we had this financial year, some of that is going to be protected for next year. Built in with that was a number of step-up, step-down beds within care facilities. So we're hoping that instead of the usual practice of being in a hospital and staying in a hospital to make all of your discharge arrangements for your longer term care, we will start using the model of best practice that has been recognised, so you discharge to assess. So we'll use those step down beds. I don't think that will mean all of the delayed transfers of care will be stopped, but it won't be as bad as it may have if we hadn't taken that case. The other element that's funded through ICF is community connectors that we've been employing to test out how better are we able to divert older people in particular to access community-based and third sector services to keep them out of the system and much more independent and able for longer. So hopefully that clarifies those.
Thank you for that, Sue. Thank you.
I mean, in terms of the comment on the maintenance budget on streetlights, I mean, the implication is there within the report and was brought out of the joint scrutiny. We are in the territory of difficult choices, and all choices will have implications. The implications are there, but if it's not from there, we'll have to find an alternative saving.
Question 6, I believe, is under Dave Congreve. Would you like to come and answer that one?
Yeah, thanks. I just need to check that I've actually got the right number of the savings measures down. I noted down CSU 1, CSU 3, CSU 9 and CSU 10. Yeah. Of those, then the only one that's different in terms of the employment implications is CSU 3, where the restructuring of the youth service is likely to lead, we think, through a voluntary severance arrangement to one less post within the service.
Thank you.
And I think the final question comes under Democratic Services. So Richard Edmonds, would you like to answer that one?
Sorry, Councillor Haynes, could I just double check I got all aspects of the questions? I was aware of the early bit, but wouldn't want to miss anything out.
SSU 5.
Yep.
The department has already had some quite heavy reductions in staff over the years. The two redundancies that are proposed, I think is 2, are they voluntary? Because throughout the report it does say that whether they're voluntary or not.
Yep, sure. The department hasn't actually had a reduction over the years. As you know, I've got to bring a report through the Democratic Services Committee annually to support to set out whether the level of support available to members is accurate, and that includes an assessment of the individuals employed in members' democratic and scrutiny structures. And that's maintained for the last couple of years, so I'm going to leave that one there. And in terms of the whether the positions or the reductions are voluntary or not, it's unlikely that they're going to be. It's going to be as a result of a service restructure and taking advantage of some of the efficient systems that we brought in to pick up the workload.
Councillor Hunt.
Okay, to maybe answer some of the political aspects of the questions, I welcome the recognition that Councillor Haynes gave of the consequences of UK government cuts on councils, and the recognition that this isn't comfortable for any of us. We're very much dealing in the world of sort of least worst alternatives, and in the world of the phrase I've used for a couple of years now of if not this, then what? So I'd say in that respect, I'm glad that Chief Officers have answered the questions that she quite rightly asked as Leader of the Opposition. But difficult choices are inevitable, and we've tried since November. All the savings measures have been public and open and able to be questioned, both sort of in this chamber and outside. So I think that's the right thing for us to do as a council. On the other point that she made about being able to tell there's election looming, I recognise that. I don't apologise for that. I happen to believe that the general election in May will decide the very future viability of local services. There's been some criticism in the papers sort of in the past week about bland or apolitical politicians not willing to nail their colours to the mast. Well, I'm trying to be the opposite of that today and nail my colours firmly to the mast. You're more than entitled in a democratic society to disagree with me, but what I won't do is apologising for making clear my thoughts on the political realities of the situation we face in this country.
Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like, firstly, Councillor Hunt, yes, we can clearly see where you have nailed your colours. Shall I now move on to my amendment, or the group amendment? The independent group would like to move the following amendment. It is only a small amendment. We hope it gets some support. To remove or reduce the following from the budget proposals. Remove SCH4 Domestic Abuse Service to reduce the hours of capacity, and that's listed as 5,000. Remove SCH12, increase community wheels charge by 30p to £4.50 with £15,000 implication. Part remove SCH14 and 15, Gwyses. The independent group would like to remove £10,000 from those £50,000 proposed. And part remove SCH2, the birthday and Christmas money for looked after children. The proposal would be to remove £14,000 from the £44,000 proposed cuts. The independent group move that members' small schemes be reduced by 50%, saving £44,000 that can then be used to cover those proposed amendments. The independent group would also move that NHB 14 introduce charges for van permits at 10,000 also be removed, as we believe this is a false economy. We hope that all members in this room see that the independent group have not taken the opportunity to grandstand or make wild political statements. Instead, we have carefully considered a very difficult budget and have moved some small amendments and savings that we believe are fair and acceptable to all. We move the amendment.
Yes, we'd like it in writing, and is it seconded? Okay, thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Could I also call for a recorded vote for the amendment, please, when it's taken?
Right. I think we're going to need to have a very short adjournment where we get some copies for all members to read what's actually on paper. Is that okay? So very short adjournment, sorry. Right, what I propose is that we have a full debate on the report and amendment and that we vote on the amendment at the end. Is that okay? Because it'll be a lot more smoother instead of being go back and forth, yeah? So, has any other members got any questions or comments? Councillor Rees. Oh, so you asked before we concluded, sorry. That's...
Just to check up on a few things that Councillor Hunter said. My understanding is, and it's been confirmed by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, is that the Labour Party, should they form the next British government, will actually introduce spending plans that will reduce or cut the Welsh budget by 2.2%. Can you confirm whether that's correct or not?
Councillor Hunt, do you want to come in on that one?
I think the two things in response to that. One is I think all the studies have shown that the Labour Party plans would act to cut public spending much slower than the Tory plans going forward would do. And secondly, in that, he may have a bit of a point. My message too, I hope, is heard by national Labour politicians, so that they can see that we do need a strong alternative that safeguard our public services. I don't deny that for a second.
Thanks for those comments, which I find useful. I hope your colleagues further up the tree will as well. An increase in council tax will mean less disposable income and possible reduction in consumption spending. How did he consider this effect on the local economy in arriving at his recommendation of a 4.75% council tax increase? I specifically want to know about how did he consider it?
It's a balancing act, isn't it? You start with the situation where you've got the savings that need to be made of around £11 million. You look at what the sort of alternative savings would be if you have to make more. And somewhere, you've seen councils, up and down Wales reach this sort of balancing point. Somewhere you find that balancing point where you think that the best balance is reached between having to make more cuts that would result in service closures, would result in vulnerable people suffering, so on, and the point where you don't want to impose too much of a burden on council taxpayers. That's a balance that we have to strike, unfortunately. I think it shows, incidentally, the limitation to the current funding system for local government, but that's maybe a debate for another day. We felt as a cabinet that the 4.75% rise was about the right balancing point. It's about 96 pence a week for a council taxpayer. Now we recognise that's difficult for people to pay. We recognise people's bills are overstretched. We're council tax bill payers ourselves, and we don't sort of minimise or not consider the impact that has on people. It's just there's no easy solution to that balance. It's anyone who says we should freeze council tax and spend more money on things, they're not being mathematically correct, aside from any political points we might want to make. Anyone having to grapple with that, whether they're a Labour politician, an independent politician, a Plaid politician, a Tory politician, has to find that balancing point somewhere, and wherever you find that balancing point, there's going to be consequences. So yes, we did try and minimise to the best of our ability the council tax rise, but for people who believe in local services and people who believe in protecting local services, then 4.75% is where we felt that balance is struck.
I was asking the question more in terms of the effect on the local economy and whether any consideration was given to that, because I feel that we should be using this budget as a weapon to fight austerity, not just put through an agenda around cuts, whoever's making them. In that context, again, was there any consideration about the effect on demand in the local economy, specifically its effects on local growth and employment as a result of the spending plans that you've introduced in this budget?
The impact on the local economy, sorry, Madam Mayor, the impact on the local economy, has to be considered in lots of different ways. Both, you're right, in terms of the council tax rate and how that affects people's disposable income. Also, I think we have to look at the effect of the local economy on unemployment rate. Some people would say that councils should respond to cuts by making wholesale redundancies. I think I don't want to go down that route, partly because I think that would have a negative effect on private sector employers in the local economy, because we're one of the biggest employers. So we've got to consider that too. And I repeat, we don't enjoy raising council tax, but our thought was the best way to safeguard and minimise the inevitable impact of austerity on local people and local services was the balance that we've raised, and that a council tax freeze would have had a negative impact in that way.
What is the percentage target, or do we have a target of how much of the £262 million should be spent locally?
Yeah, Councillor Hunt.
Andrew Maisie is doing lots of good work on ensuring wherever possible that local suppliers and local employers are kept informed of procurement across local government and across public services. I think he's doing really good work in that. I accept the premise behind his question that we should do everything we can to try and to make sure that where we can we use local suppliers within the rules for the money we spend.
I just want to thank Councillor Hunt for engaging in that sort of short debate, and I appreciate the time he's put into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a few things to say. Firstly, with regard to the amendment that's been proposed by Councillor Haynes, I think that it seeks to make the budget that we see in front of us marginally better, so I'm inclined to be sympathetic to it. Nothing that comes out of today's meeting will be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that this is a thoughtful contribution, and I think it's worthy of support. Councillor Hunt made a lot of interesting points and comments. As always, he's lucid and intelligent, and makes a good argument. He's made a couple of comments about funding beyond this authority, so I think that legitimises me to respond slightly in kind. But I want to go beyond actually what Councillor Hunt said, to begin with false choices. We've had some suggestions, not actually in this meeting, that there is a false choice that we can, the choice that somehow we can overthrow the system that we have at the moment, that we can overthrow the evil capitalist or neoliberal system or whatever you want to call it, and bring in a nirvana. I went to a communist country once. I went to the Soviet Union, and it is hard to think of a sadder, more dismal and more depressing place. There are many, many things about this country, about the economic system we have, that are so far from perfect. And I struggle to think of a country in the world that I would consider to be perfect. But what we have is the least bad way of ordering the affairs of a country. And it is... Nobody has come up with a compelling argument, a demonstrably successful argument for a different way of running a country. As far as I'm aware, I would be delighted if somebody could prove concrete evidence that is not the case. So I reject the idea that somehow there's a magic alternative. There isn't. We're stuck with what we have, and we have to make the best of it. So yes, government funding of the Welsh Assembly, who obviously fund us. Councillor Hunt has criticised the Westminster Government for their funding arrangement, which he's absolutely entitled to do. That is the gist, it's the essence of political debate. The general election is in 65 days' time. On 66 days from now, there could be a government, there could be a majority Labour government with Mr Miliband as Prime Minister. That is a possible outcome. I wonder, in the run-up to that, could we expect that there will be a manifesto commitment from the Labour Party to increase funding to the Welsh Government? If there was, then that would add tremendous weight to Councillor Hunt's comments, because one might assume some of that additional funding would flow to local authorities. I doubt that there will be such a manifesto commitment. Obviously now we cannot prejudge, but I doubt it very much. And therefore that somewhat undermines Councillor Hunt's criticisms of the current coalition government if an incoming Labour government pretty much carry on with the same process. One of the reasons why I'm not optimistic, I do not think that the Labour Party would make a manifesto commitment to increase funding for the Welsh Government, is because, and perhaps this is a cynical view of politicians, having forced from Westminster and from Cardiff all these nasty, difficult, ugly decisions onto local councillors such as ourselves, why on earth is a Westminster Government going to seek to bring those problems back upon itself by having to find the money itself? So that's just the grim reality of politics. So I would be interested whether the Labour Party will support Councillor Hunt's position. And I want to talk specifically, a comment was made, not from somebody within this chamber, from the back somewhere, about morality. I want to talk about morality. Councillor Hunt has bemoaned the bland politicians, and he's right, there's far too many of them. We should be talking about big issues, and we should be talking about matters that are philosophical. Morality. I personally think, and this is why I support the party as I do, that it is immoral. It is immoral for us here in the here and now to spend money that we do not have and to force that burden onto the shoulders of our children and our grandchildren and their children, because borrowing is deferred taxation. If we borrow now, if we borrow more now, we are not solving some problem, we are creating a problem that will grow in size through the joys of compound interest, and that will be visited upon future generations. And I think for us here and now to duck decisions and take the easy, apparently easy option of borrowing money without the ability to repay it and leaving the problem for somebody else to clean up, that to me is immoral. And I'm not afraid to use words like that. We should use words like that. That is the essence of political debate. So for me, the Conservative, the coalition government, though I hope there will be a change of government on May the 7th. I hope there will be a majority Conservative government. So I'm looking forward to changing government. It is absolutely right that we do bend every sinew to eliminate the deficit as soon as possible, because that means we reduce the amount of money that is borrowed, we reduce the debt payments that future generations will have to saddle, and yes, it's tough. But if people find politics a bit tough, well, they should do something else. Yes, it's tough. And so I recognise the difficulty that Councillor Hunt has. But his party is advocating borrowing more. That's indisputably the case, and I think that that is, to a greater extent, causing problems for future generations, and we should not be doing that. You only have to look at the classic example of somewhere like Greece, where they live beyond their means, they borrow today, and they burden future generations. That's why they are suffering the problems they do. So, let me just wind up slightly. I note Councillor Haynes' comments and amendment, and I think it has merit. But generally, to say that there is some magic wand that will occur if Councillor Hunt's party was in government in Westminster, as they are in Cardiff, I think is itself a false choice. I think we will be facing the same struggles if his party were in power nationally as we do at present. One of the things that politicians do, and I bemoan bland politicians, as Councillor Hunt does, is that too often, where different parties agree, they hide that agreement. And where there are tiny, tiny differences, those differences are exaggerated. And that prevents us having a more intelligent, intellectual discussion and debate about solving problems. On the subject of morality, I'm in politics because I want to see a better community. I want to see people better able to pursue life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And to me, I support the party I support, the Conservative Party, because to me it is the most moral way of ordering ourselves. Many disagree, people may shake their heads, but do not think that I do not have some intellectual and moral underpinning for the views I hold and which I sincerely hold. It's easy for people to bandy around cheap slogans and things, but there we are. So I'll shut up now and let other councillors contribute, and I'm sure they will have lots of sensible things to say. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
just welcome, some of what Councillor Smith said. Look, as I hinted at in what I said before, I think we should avoid trying to say that because we disagree on the direction of things that one or other of us is immoral, and I think that's one of the slightly regrettable things about what Terry said this morning, if I can say that. And you're quite right. This is tough, but don't listen to me whinge for a minute, because if I don't like it, then I can go and do something else. Interestingly, the disagreement shown up by the previous two speakers, if you like, on one respect, Councillor Rees is saying we're sticking too close to Tory spending plans, and then we're attacked as the Labour Party for borrowing too much. And both points are entirely within your rights to make them as respected politicians. But it's why, for example, on the alternative I spelt out, it was based on a cash freeze. It wasn't based on a real terms increase. It was based, in fact, on a real terms cut in money. So what I'm saying is, as local councils, it would be unrealistic of us to expect to go back to the days of big increases. But it's the extent and the speed at which the money is cut which is vital, because if you cut it beyond a certain rate, it's very hard to make those savings through just the normal sort of efficiencies, doing things better, doing things differently, and you start getting into cuts that really have a detrimental impact on the local services that we run. In terms of, again, what you say about the least imperfect system, I agree with that. I think that the false choice that's presented by those who say we should set somehow all councils should refuse to set a legal budget, and that would somehow lead to utopia is naive in the extreme. What it would lead to is council workers getting redundancy notices and council services being plunged into chaos that would be to the detriment of those who rely on those services. I think that would be highly irresponsible. It might make some of us celebrities, but I think that would be a highly irresponsible thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's no question about it. We have very hard times ahead of us, not just this council, but councils throughout the country. We've had speakers today cutting lighting, the community meals, wheels are going to go up, children's service, vital children's services are being cut. We put leisure centres into trust, community centres into trust. There are other things we could put into trust as well. I mean, I'm sure you know what I'm going to talk about now is the community farm, which, when we talk about it, I mean, Councillor Hunt was quoted in the paper saying that there are 58 bus trips there, coach trips there with children from other boroughs, Wales, thousands of tourists. And this council some time ago took the decision not to support tourism. But Councillor Hunt is basically saying that how many thousands of tourists we have there. And these are people from outside the borough. We are putting £300,000 into it, and we're talking cutting vital services here. We could put that farm into a trust because it's never going to pay itself. We're going to be paying for it for the rest of its life. It's old, it's dated. At its conception, it was serving a purpose, but now it's a very, very expensive pet centre. We have in the report additional income generated for the community farm, optimistic, without further capital investment. And that's what it needs, investment. But this council cannot afford this investment. This should go into a trust, as the leisure centres have, as the community centres have. Why are we holding on to it? It's never ever, in the last 5 years, it's achieved nothing. It's achieved nothing. What it has is achieved loss after loss after loss. I'm sure there'll be a few comments about my comments later on, but just to put people wise to it, in conversation, it's not just me, because I've had conversation with some Labour members as well, and one Labour member said, waste of money, build houses on it, and that's the Labour members. And I have encouraged my own convictions, but he wouldn't, or won't. These people won't come out and say it within this chamber because they don't want to upset their beloved leader over there, because he was a founder member, he's on the shadow board, and they don't want to upset him. And that's the actual words, can't upset him. And they will, because of the consequence after. So I say to people,
what the legal officer would like to say about that?
And come out and say it. Thank you.
I don't know what the legal officer would like to say about that.
Nice and quiet. Linda, do you want to come in?
I haven't got any comment on that. I think Councillor Burnett has finished his point, and I don't think it overstepped the mark in relation to that. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt?
I think if you read the comment I made in reply to the story, it was quite balanced, if you like. If you say the farmers achieved nothing in 5 years, they've achieved in the last 2 years a 20% saving. And look, I was very, very frank in the response I gave. In common with all other local services, if the current level of funding cuts continue, then there'll be more challenging times ahead. But I sometimes think that it's less a community farm and more the Noah's Ark of funding solutions for the independent group. Because the farm is subsidised to the tune of £300,000 a year, but we're dealing with a budget here of over £250 million a year. Now, not every funding solution can be reached by closing the farm. There's only so many times you can spend that money. And I think if his accusation is that I will not, as the executive member, challenge the farm to make savings because of some personal relationship, then I entirely refute that, because I have done and I will do. However, we have to look at the flip side, and the farm does provide a lot of opportunities for young people, especially some of the most disadvantaged young people and the young people who face the most challenges in our community. And so I think in taking forward what we do with the farm, we have to take that into consideration, as we would with any other service that we run. But undeniably, given the challenging funding situation that we have to look forward to in the future, then, the farm, like every other service, is going to face challenging times. So I can assure him that I won't shirk from that responsibility that I hold, but I'd also like to maybe ask him to pause to think that maybe the farm isn't the solution to the millions and millions of pounds of financial savings that councils across the UK need to make, and to recognise some of the benefit that it does give our community.
Thank you, Madam. Well, I did say about putting it in trust, not closing it, but putting it in private trust, and it could be very, very successful. As I said, this council do not have the money to do that. Private trusts do. There's grants to come. And when you said the community farmers already saved 20%, can you show us how it's done? Because would that be the 20% saving? Is that when the bacterial outbreak was there and it cost umpteen thousands of pounds in 2013? So actually in 2014 you didn't have that expense. So is that what you're saying? This 20% was saved from the year before, which was an expense because of the bacterial outbreak there. So you didn't really save it. It's just one expense for that year.
In the budget last year were a number of savings to the tune of, I believe, £90,000 that were achieved by the farm, making a number of efficiency savings and changing the way that it worked. It's not the end of the story, but it's wrong to not recognise that they've made an effort in those respects. And again, it's wrong to say that, if the farm suddenly broke even or suddenly closed or whatever you want to say, that it would negate the £11 million problem that we've got this year alone. You can only spend that money once, and it's only a small amount of money in the frame of a budget of £250 million a year.
Just one more question. Would this council consider putting the farm into a private trust to make it more profitable and more entertaining then, and somewhere to go and see? And safeguard the farm itself into a private trust, because it's not been safeguarded as it is. But a private company could come along and do a lot of good there. So would this council suggest putting it into a trust at all, or think about it in the future to safeguard it?
John, before you come in, John,
bring the leader in.
Can I just, I think we need a presentation on the farm to understand where it came from and what its role and function is. That's the first point. Yes, we have considered it, and in fact, about 8 years ago. First of all, let me establish that you have called in the paper to close the farm. You've obviously revised your view now, and now you're saying that you don't mind it being open if it goes into a trust. We done this about 10 years ago, and what happened during the process of considering putting it into a trust is we had swine fever, and the farm shut for 4 months and lost money hand over fist. Had we been in a trust, we'd have gone bankrupt and we'd have had to sell it. That went on for 2 or 3 years, and the next thing we had, was a chicken infection, which lasted about 4 months. And so on both of those occasions, had we been a trust, we would have gone through. Now, we're going to issue about looking at the possibility of putting it into a trust, as long as the council, as long as legally you can underpin it as far as the council is concerned, and should any of those two events happen in the course of time, then the council would have to bail it out. Now, whether that can be done, I don't know, but we've got no problem with that. There's never been any resistance in putting the farm into a trust. We've been advised by officers that as a consequence of those two situations which happened 2 or 3 years between each other, that we would have gone bust. And it's as simple as that. Now, I don't want to document what the farm does. I think most people understand where you're coming from, because you come out publicly in the paper and said you wanted shut down. I don't think that's the view of a lot of people in Torvine. And I also say to you that there is much good that the farm does which is not documented for disadvantaged people and for a raft of other things. And perhaps what you need is educating on what the farm actually does. And then you might change your view. I'll finish there, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Councillor Daniels.
Okay, so we had a lecture earlier from Councillor Smith on morality. So I'd quite like to deliver one of my own. 1 million people having to rely on food banks, underemployment and poor quality jobs at an all-time high. Unemployment almost 2 million, yet the number of jobs in the hundreds and thousands each year. And all the while, you paint unemployed people as scroungers. These people that can't... Your party do.
I've been unemployed. Don't lecture me about that.
No, so have I. And I've been painted as a scrounger. Your party paint people as scroungers. So, I'll carry on. The bedroom tax. The bedroom tax, forcing people to have to find money to bridge the gap, or move to a place that doesn't, a smaller property that doesn't exist. Benefit sanctions, where you're 1 day late and you're docked a month's pay, which puts you completely out in the cold. Homelessness at an all-time high. And it's funny that Councillor Graham should talk about saddling future generations with debt, when the Tories have tripled tuition fees to £9,000 a year, saddling my generation with debt. Taken donations from payday loans, saddling my generation with debt. And been utterly ineffective at tackling climate change, which will saddle my generation with the biggest debt of all. So don't lecture me on morality when your party represents that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Yes, and this is very much going to, echo what Councillor Daniels has said. I refuse to have morality preached to me by the leader of the Conservative group. We all know, or should know, that 99% of the wealth of this world is owned by the top 1% of the people. I belong to a party and for the last 50 years has been fighting for a fairer redistribution of wealth and social justice. We have a Tory cabinet at the moment where it seems everyone is a millionaire. If they do have to go into a coalition, it will probably be with UKIP, another party led by a millionaire. I'm sorry, but I was put on this council to stand up for the ordinary people of this party, of this valley in particular, and for the whole of Wales. And I'm very glad that we are working so hard with our Labour MP and our Labour AM to try and right some of the wrongs that have been inflicted. You've heard about the bedroom tax. You've heard about the fact that we have bankers claiming absolutely enormous bonuses, and at the same time their banks are making ordinary tellers redundant and foreclosing on mortgages and loans that have sustained struggling companies. If you want, if you want to talk about morality, turn up at some of the seminars on the budget, turn up at the audit committee and bring another of your Conservative members that we don't see very often. We have been talking about these budget cuts, not only the Labour group but colleagues from other groups for a long time now, trying to have the best mitigating measures. Just to come out and slam what we're doing, I think is very, very sort of unfortunate. And could I invite the members of those other groups to put their money where their mouth is, and like the Labour councillors, refuse to take the annual increase that has been suggested by the remuneration panel. I know some of the non-Labour councillors do, but we have done it for many years now as a proof that we are going to suffer along, obviously, with our constituents.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham? I was gone, okay, thank you. Right. Councillor Bevan. Can we also, I think we should soon get back to the points in the budget and the report as well. Is that okay? Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will respond to the comments made by Councillor Daniels. If we're going to look at debt and what's been saddled on the future generations, I think you should look no further than your own Labour Party colleagues, because this country was brought to the brink of bankruptcy by the Labour government. So, and that's the situation that the coalition government have inherited, is a position of debt where they're being forced to do something about it. But I will try and focus on some of the points that have been raised. Is it feasible for us to increase the collection rate to 99%? Is that prudent, whilst at the same time trying to propose an increase of 4.75% this year in the council tax? There's been a lot of concern expressed about protection of jobs, and I'm all in favour of that, with Councillor Hunt and Councillor Daniels saying that. We do want to try and not avoid having to make compulsory redundancies. But the Assistant Chief Executive, Nigel Aurelius, made a point that we can't look at inflation, and I think we should, really, not just from a council perspective, because as far as the individual people living in our wards, and after all that's who we're elected to represent, their wages haven't kept pace with inflation, and never mind the increases that we're asking them to find in council tax. I mean, 4.75% this year and 4% last year, that's nearly 9% in 2 years. Councillor Hunt puts all the blame on the coalition government in Westminster, but the truth is, since we've had a Labour government run in Wales, the last 15 years, there's been a 150% increase in the council tax. Where we're talking about protection for the lowest paid employees within the council, well, it seems a bit hypocritical to me, because this council did not support my motion I presented last year for a living wage to be paid to those lowest paid employees. So that seems a bit, hypocritical to say about protecting the most vulnerable. If this council truly wanted to protect the most vulnerable while simultaneously asking for a 4.75% increase in council tax, they should have adopted a living wage policy and not a minimum wage. Okay, a lot of people say, we've got to present a credible alternative. If we don't go with what's on the table today, what do we do? Well, I think we really have to look as a council at whether we proceed with the rapid pace that we're doing with this huge investment in the 21st Century Schools programme. I think that we should have had a look at that, because once you ring-fence that expenditure and ring-fence the expenditure on social services, as we know, there's very little left that we can look at to try and squeeze further savings out of, percentage-wise, out of the pot. It's such a small percentage, we're left with very few alternatives. This council we've got a position at the moment where we've got issues with, it was mentioned in the consultation with residents, issues that are concerned other frontline services, but also highways and street lighting. Now, I've raised this point repeatedly, and I've got further questions on it today as well. This austerity cuts that we keep referring to have been coming in for the last few years. But there's a significant backlog on the lack of investment this council has made in terms of the highways, with a 30 million backlog in essential maintenance. That is something that has accrued over probably a decade or more. That is not a new phenomenon that's coming in. In terms of the government, political points being made, some of the cuts that have come through to local government have come from the Welsh Assembly government by not passing on the full precepts to local government. And at the same time, they can see fit to spend over £100 million of taxpayers' money on buying 50 million on Cardiff Airport and another 50 million on commercial business ventures within Wales as well, rather than passing that money back down to local government. Another point is, in this report, there's an increase in the gross revenue for overall budget within Torfaen now. With this increase in council tax, the percentage gross increase of the overall revenue will rise from 12.5% to 14%. And just as a final point, I would like to ask whether the executive has consulted with other county borough councils, like Monmouthshire, who have managed in previous years to produce budgets where there's been no council tax increase for residents. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for your points. I'll take them in order. The decision to increase our assumed collection rate to 99%. The difference, if you like, is that let's say we would collect about 99% of council tax. The difference between having an assumed collection rate lower or one at 99% is that if you collect above your assumed rate, the balance goes into reserves. And the judgment that we made is that we felt that rather than allowing a surplus to build up in reserves, we'd rather protect services at the outset by putting that into the budget. It doesn't make any difference about the money we get in, because you get in whatever you take anyway, rather than what you assume. It's just whether that extra money, if there is any, sits in reserves or actually in the budget for services. And we felt in the current situation the best thing to do was to have that money sitting within the services. I welcome his recognition of our policy to protect employment wherever possible. I think that's the right thing to do by our staff, but I also, as I intimated to Councillor Rees, think that's the right thing to do by our local economy, given that we can't negate our responsibility as a big employer in the Valley. On the investment in 21st century schools, I'll point out that is capital as opposed to revenue spending, and I'd also point out the value of improving the fabric of our schools so that our young people aren't being taught in schools that aren't suitable for the 21st century. On the living wage, I remain committed to trying to address the living wage. It's just difficult in a situation where you're trying to protect employment and the money that you get to do so when 60 to 70% of your bills are staffing costs to do that without having a potentially negative knock-on effect. But I think that's something that we'd all like to continue to investigate as much as we can. I value the strong working relationship that we've got with our trade unions, and that's something that we discuss regularly. On the backlog on highways, it's not a situation that just affects Torfaen. I think there was a study that came out a couple of months ago that quantified the problem that exists throughout Britain on the backlog of road surface repairs. We've put provision within the budget this year to use the local government borrowing initiative, I think, to try and spend money and to try and bridge that gap. But it's something that every council is struggling with. And on the question of whether we've consulted with other county boroughs, Monmouthshire, I think, came out with a 4.95% council tax increase this year, if I'm right. And that shows that no one has the sort of the magic wand to make this funding problem go away. But on the sort of the premise of the point you make, you're quite right. We shouldn't sit back and think we have all the answers here in Torfaen. I go out and speak to other executive members for finance. I know Nigel speaks a lot through the Society of Welsh Treasurers to other Section 151 officers. We try and share solutions. I think it's key as well that we look outside of Wales as well as within Wales to see what solutions we can come across. But there's I don't know the total number of councils across Britain. No one has found a magic wand to try and to make this fundamental point of demand going up and funding going down balance without making tough decisions. So yes, we should speak to other people, we should look at it, but I unfortunately, I think if I wished that would make the problem go away, then it won't.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you. I'm not going to go into the whole political side of it. I just want to say that with the rhetoric of it, it always seems to me that unless something or somebody can make money, then they're worthless. And I think, our situation in Torfaen, that we do have a lot of people in Torfaen who cannot work for various reasons. They're always being made to feel as if they somehow don't matter because they're not making money. And I really disagree with that, and that's, why I'm in local politics. And it's also, my main point is why the coming amendment, why I won't be supporting it, even though I agree that they're all important things, is that the small schemes budget is actually vital to a lot of third sector organisations throughout the borough, which will be picking up a lot of the slack because of these cuts. So, for example, within the youth service, for elderly people, meal clubs, that sort of thing. And I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that we took 50% of that out when I know so many groups are very, very reliant on that money. Okay.
I'd like to echo the points you made about small schemes. I know in my own ward we've helped a lot of the organisations that have been affected by cuts. Bowls clubs, for example, youth community sports teams that would suffer if that money was taken away.
Councillor Yowell.
Yeah, it's a bit out of step now and out of line, because I wanted to respond to Councillor Bevan's opening remarks. I'm surprised at Councillor Bevan, because he's usually far more measured. Surprised, that is, for him to introduce his remarks that were subsequently more measured by this outlandish attack on the previous Labour government, talking in terms of the last Labour government is responsible for all the ills and calumnies that confront us. Now, this is absolute arrant nonsense. Had it not been for the Labour government, the last Labour government, confronting the issue of the banks, we would have been in an incredibly different and worse position than we were, and the subsequent coalition government would have been in a massive predicament because they wouldn't or couldn't do anything about it at the time. Councillor Bevan's remarks, and indeed the remarks, because these are echoed right across the various levels of Tory representation, both locally in the Assembly and indeed in Westminster. They seem to be predicated on this notion of Goebbels with his edict that if you tell a lie often enough and long enough, then people might believe it is the truth. Absolute rubbish.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It was interesting that this budget debate is actually elevated to national politics, and we've had representatives from both main parties. From my perspective, I'm part of the independent group, and I don't think I have any more influence than anyone else in this room on national politics. Interestingly, you just find something funny there. Yes, there was a few points that were that I can look at that were made, but my perception is contrary to what a few have said, whereby there's no government wants to be cutting, and this government unfortunately have had to pick up the pieces from the last government and have cut for the whole of their term. Every government, as we have seen in our lives, as always in the last year, saved enough money to make some fantastic changes in the budget, to spend. But is that bad? Is that dire? And they were left with that poor a set of accounts that they have had no choice but to cut. On a Welsh national level, it's quite common knowledge. Just
that the Welsh Labour-led government have completely. It's been a catastrophe from our health, our employment, everything. But it does reflect in the 22 regions that we have in Wales, whereby the 5 worst-run councils are Labour. And Labour-run councils, none of them feature in the 5 top. There must be a link to competency there. Interesting points from Mary Barnett, who says she represents the ordinary people, and she criticised the Tory millionaires. The Tories make no bones. They love creating millionaires, and I believe there's not a member in this room that wants to better themselves, and I believe that 95% of us are actually capitalists. The other 5% lie. And if you look at these ordinary people that is represented, look at, I'll never wear the ermine Kinnock, multi-millionaire, Tony and Sherry Blair, Two Jags Prescott, Ed Miliband. I mean, these are multi-millionaires. Let's not beat about the bush here. So, this ordinary people facade is an absolute nonsense. David Daniels, as far left as you like, he came out with his little spiel there, but he's so far left he wants to abolish the monarchy, and I wonder if his Tottenham electorate actually, are aware of that. But I have to take on board what my colleague, Councillor Burnett, said about Green Meadow. This is a reflection of how Labour run their businesses. I mean, the farm is hemorrhaging £300,000 odd a year. Hemorrhaging. This could mean lights on for people. It could take the sting out of being poor for a lot of our elderly. But they're continuing to throw good money at bad, and that is the way Labour politics is they believe in the money tree. We'll grow a few money trees, and unfortunately there are no seeds left for them to grow. You've had Ed Balls has criticised the Tory cuts for the last 5 years and Miliband, but now that the economy's on track, they have no alternative. They've criticised it for 5 years. I think everyone's missed a trick here. They're taking their eye off the ball with one party that's coming through strongly, hopefully UKIP, and my bets are on it. I like my independence. However, my bet is on a Tory UKIP coalition. That's my bet, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Harris, but I think we should get back again to the budget and the report in question. Councillor Morby.
It's been a really interesting debate for the last half hour or so. There are many who have expressed opinions which are far to the right of where I am, in my views, both location-wise and in terms of their politics and their views. A lot of nonsense talked about, and I'm not saying solely on the right side. We all could learn from debates like this what is a good thing to say and what is a totally stupid thing to say. Personally, you know that I'm with Aneurin Bevan as far as the Tory party is concerned. But I think probably we've had enough, and I'm now going to move that the question be put.
Okay, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of personal statements, not representing anyone else. I have spoken for the independent group. These are my personal opinions. I know there's not anything we can do about precepts. But I am concerned to see that the cost per head of town and community councils are vastly different, ranging from £21.93 to £50.62 per head at Band D. And I know
Sorry, could I interject a moment, because the Mayor have called upon Councillor Haynes now, presumably, to speak to amendment and wind the debate up. I've been refused to speak, and because Councillor Morby moved the question to be put, I didn't say anything. So I thought Councillor Haynes now is winding the debate up and speaking to her amendment, not bringing in additional items.
Yeah, is that okay? Well, I've got 3 people waiting to speak. I mean, we can let those 3 people speak and then go straight to the amendment and their vote. Is that okay? Or straight to the amendment? you.
My intention was that we should stop the discussion and vote.
Right, you've got a right to sum up, Councillor Haynes. So can you sort of sum up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Morby. I was going to say that I was glad that things were proceeding, not as bad as another council and the sham that took place in their authority on budgets. But as it turned out, we've practically had every party political broadcast that we can imagine here today. I don't actually think that's what people in Torfaen want to see. They want to see us discuss the budget and set the budget. But I will move on to my amendment because I can see Councillor Yowell having his little say down there. The amendment reads... The amendment reads, the Independent Group would like to move the following amendment. Remove or reduce the following from the budget proposals as described. Remove SCH4, Domestic Abuse Service, reduced hours capacity at 5,000. Remove SCH12, increased community wheel charges by 30p to 45 at £4.50 to 15,000. Part remove SCH14 and 15 Gwysis, remove £10,000 from the 50,000 proposed, and part remove SCH2, birthday and Christmas money for looked after children, remove 14,000 from the 44,000 proposed cuts. The Independent Group move that the member small schemes be reduced by 50%, saving 44,000 that is then used to cover the amendment proposed. The Independent Group also move that NHB 14, the introduction of charges for van permits, also be removed, as we believe this is a false economy. Just as an aside, Councillor Powell said that small schemes money was vital for small schemes money was vital for groups. So I sort of question why the leader said that it should be he's looking to use it for litter picking sticks.
Right, okay. Can I have everyone in favour? We want a recorded vote. Yeah, you both recorded vote, didn't we? Yes, on the amendment. All those in favour of recorded vote? Or is, yeah.
Miss, I'll call out your name as usual. Can you just say clearly whether you're for, against or abstaining from the amendment presented by Councillor Haynes? Okay, Councillor Ashley, you're first.
Against!
Yes. Councillor Barnett.
Against.
Councillor Bevan.
For.
Councillor Brooks. Councillor Burnett.
For.
Councillor Cameron. Councillor Curran. Councillor Gwynaira Clark. Councillor Richard Clark.
Against.
Councillor Constance.
Against.
Councillor Crick. Councillor Cross.
Abstain.
Councillor Cunningham.
Against.
Councillor Daniels. Councillor Nigel Davis.
Against.
Councillor Evans. Councillor Graham.
Abstain.
Councillor Harnett. Councillor Harris. Councillor Haynes.
For.
Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jeremiah. Councillor Lewis Jones. Councillor Kemp. Councillor Marshall. Councillor Morby. Councillor Mills. Councillor Owen. Councillor Parish.
Against.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Rees.
Abstain.
Councillor Seaborn.
Against.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Tomlinson. Councillor Waite. Councillor Wellington. Councillor Yole.
Against.
Madam Mayor, we'll just count up the figures.
Yeah.
Okay, members, thank you. The amendment was lost. There was 27 against, 9 for and 3 abstaining. So we now go back to the recommendations, which is shown on pages 42, 43 and 44 of your agenda.
Madam Mayor, can I call for a recorded vote, please?
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so we're going to go straight to the vote, yes? Right, okay.
Again, members, this time, can you please say clearly for, against or abstain in relation to the recommendations in the report? Councillor Ashley.
Very quietly, for.
Councillor Barnett.
For.
Councillor Bevan.
Against.
Councillor Brooks. Councillor Burnett. Councillor Cameron.
For.
Councillor Carron. Councillor Gwenara Clark. Councillor Richard Clark. Councillor Constance. Councillor Crick. Councillor Cross.
Against.
Councillor Cunningham.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Daniels. Councillor Nigel Davis. Councillor Evans.
Against.
Councillor Graham.
Against.
Councillor Harnett. Councillor Harris. Councillor Haynes.
Against.
Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jeremiah. Councillor Lewis-Jones. Councillor Kemp.
Against.
Councillor Marshall. Councillor Morby. Councillor Mills. Councillor Owen. Councillor Parish.
For.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Rees.
Against.
Councillor Seaborn.
For.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thomas.
For.
Councillor Tomlinson. Councillor Waite. Councillor Wellington. Councillor Yule.
For.
Okay, members, thank you. The budget's been passed with 27 for, 10 against and 2 abstaining. So, thank you, members. We'll now move on to agenda item 10, Corporate Parenting Panel. Sue Evans, Chief Officer of Social Care and Housing. Can you present your report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, members. Okay, we're on page 195 now in your pack. Hopefully this report will be short and snappy. The purpose of the report is to remind members of the corporate parenting panel, and you'll have all seen today an updated corporate parenting handbook to members. And just to remind members that all members are corporate parents. It isn't just the relevant executive members, or myself as Chief Officer or Head of Children and Families. This is one of those corporate responsibilities you have as members, and I would suggest to you that it is a pretty important responsibility. I've attached a report card to the report, and I'll highlight some of the activities there and some of the information that is presented regularly to the corporate parenting panel. But in regards to the parenting handbook, what this contains is a lot of the legislative framework that underpins looked after children and our responsibilities as a council in relation to those, and it also describes the various teams and the functions of the Children's and Families Service and the work we do with our partners both within the council but obviously externally as well, particularly with the NHS and the police in relation to looked after children and children who need safeguarding. So I'm suggesting you have a good look at this and refresh your memory of some of the legislative underpinning and the work that we've been doing. And if you remember, back in 2013, the Council agreed a mandate for all elected members to undertake corporate parenting training. We've held 5 sessions to date, with 32 members undertaken in the development session, and we will be putting more sessions on this year to capture the remainder of members. So, there's a plea from me to urge you to take part in those development sessions, particularly those who haven't been, but some of you who may have been in the early period, you may want to go on a refresher. And you'll see from the report card that feedback has been very good or excellent. So those people who have attended it have benefited from that training. The other thing to highlight, it's a high national profile at the moment, you'll be aware. We've done several briefings for members, and child sex exploitation was one of the most recent ones that a lot of members found that very beneficial to really try and understand some of the complexities that our frontline staff and partners are dealing with. I don't want to go too much further into the report. Just to reiterate, this is a whole council responsibility, and as corporate parents, if we don't get actively engaged with this, you would be failing in your statutory duties as a corporate parent. Just looking at the report card itself, what we've highlighted there on the first page, that's page 197 in your pack, you'll know that we are relatively high compared to other similar-sized councils. And you've got some of the figures there for you, 293 in 2013-14 and then 296 last year. We do an awful lot of work of trying to understand what's underneath those figures. And one of the quality assurance things that I use to assess, well, are we taking the wrong children into care, is the way that these are legal judgments when we propose that a child may be at risk and needs to come under care. I mean, the courts actually determine that, as most of you will be aware. And we've had one case in the last 10 years where the courts have actually gone against our recommended decision. So I think that's a good indicator that the frontline practitioners and the practice at the front line is pretty good standard, that the cases that we're saying to the courts need to be formally looked after, most of them. One case we've recently had is the judiciary agrees that yes, there is a child at risk, and we do need to take them formally into care. You'll also see there the spend. And we're doing an awful lot of work on making sure that we use our in-house foster carers and our own local services to support looked after children. But you can see that if the numbers do increase, and an awful lot of the issues we're dealing with are related to neglect, which relates to poverty in the borough, and other complex family issues and dynamics. So some of you will be aware of this with your own constituencies and the work you're doing in your wards. So obviously there's a big focus on us trying to keep children out of the care system. We think we've got the right children in, the ones we know about. and consequently looking at the spend profile. The other performance indicator there that we've highlighted are the number of moves for a child. And you'll be aware that, to move a child constantly around the care system isn't very good in terms of their long-term stability and moving into adulthood. But we've been pretty good, 7.4%, and the Welsh average, 8.3%. So we're doing pretty well under that indicator. And some moves are done for the right reasons. There may be a risk factor, or it may be a natural transition from a school into another area, which means that, it would be in the child's best interest for that foster placement to change as well. Residential placements, you've got highlighted there some of the costs. They can be in excess of £200,000 a year, because they're usually for the more complex children with higher needs, very often with behaviour that challenges, so that ordinary local foster carers find it very difficult to keep them in their own community. But we place an awful lot of emphasis on using our own locally employed, the ones that we call in-house foster carers, and an average cost of those are £40,000, so you can see the significant difference in terms of cost. So it really is trying to make sure we maximise the benefits and the potential of our in-house. And you'll also see there at the bottom of that second page of graphs, we use an awful lot of kinship carers. So that's where people may not be able to stay with their birth parents, but children are staying with extended members of the family. And again, that's better for the child, and it's much more economical as well. So if you look at the total of those sorts of arrangements, 30% of our looked after children are placed within the family unit. So again, that's pretty good in comparison to others. The next slide and set of graphs is the members' corporate parenting panel sessions, and you can see there very good results from those people who have attended. So I would urge all those who haven't been to book your place as soon as you see those sessions advertised. The other area that I think we're doing pretty well is the health indicators. You'll be aware, looked after children, our responsibilities are not just about keeping them safe. We have to make sure they're healthy, they're thriving, they attend school, they achieve good results. And you would expect looked after children, if we're doing our very best for them, to be some of the highest achievers. That it isn't usually the case, because a lot of the disadvantage they've experienced as a younger age has done some of that damage before they come into the care system. So very often we're trying to rebuild up some of that capacity. But we are performing higher than the national average in terms of health assessments, so making sure children are attending, and also in terms of regular dental checks. Oral health is one of those unreported issues that leads to longer-term health issues later in life. So it is important that we get children into that habit of regularly visiting the dentist. And for those children that hadn't received a dental check in the period that was due, more than 50% of them were either under 2 or over 16. And when they're over 16, it's difficult to force a 16-year-old to attend a dentist. The final slides then are about the educational attainment. And again, as I was saying, some of this we're doing as good as the Welsh averages. And you look at that first one there, percentage of attendance at primary school, we're hovering between 95% and 95.4%. The Welsh average is 95.1%. Not doing so well in the secondary school, we're at 88%, relative to the Welsh average for looked after children, 91%. And again, as I said earlier, pretty low, which is good, on the non-transitional moves, so children are having stable placements. The key indicator then in that very final part of the slide is the attainment for Key Stage 2, 73.3%. The Welsh looked after children average is 51.6%, so very good there. We'd like to just keep improving there and get us in line with non-looked after children, because for all Torfaen children the average is 91% at Key Stage 2. We're not doing as well at Key Stage 3, we're only at 33.3%, but that is comparable with the Welsh average for looked after children at 37%. But it's way under all Torfaen children at 82%. So again, we know where we need to focus our attention. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what the corporate panel regularly receives, some of the statistics that they look at. Just to remind you that it is all members' responsibility, it is a corporate responsibility, you are the corporate parents, and to really urge those who haven't been to the parenting panel at the training sessions to really sign up when you see those advertised, and to speak to your colleagues about the benefits that they've gained. Happy to take any questions, but that's the report concluded.
Thank you, Sue. Members who have any questions or comments? Councillor Morby.
Sue, just a quick question. You've got figures there in relation to education for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, but not Key Stage 4, and that is a rather more important measure, I would have thought, and one that we particularly need to address in trying to ensure that a good portion of children who are looked after are able to go into sixth forms, take A-levels or other further qualifications, and it would be useful to have those statistics in future.
Yeah, I'll make sure that we do an amended version and send that out to members outside the meeting, so we include Key Stage 4.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, my question is about out-of-county placements. And can you tell us what process is in place to make sure that these children are safeguarded? Can I just ask the second question? I'm just looking around here at members who may be school governors. And I think it's very important that if you're a member of a school governing body, you ask about the number of looked after children in the school and that you track their progress. When the head teacher gives a report, I think all governors should ask how many looked after children do we have and what processes are we being to make sure they are tracked and achieving the very best they can. You all have a duty, members, as school governors, to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of the what arrangements we make sure that they're safeguarded, there are several ways we do that. First of all, most of those out-of-county placements are on a contract where we will have our obligations set out. And that contract is within a framework of contracts that is overseen by SUIC, that's the South East Wales Improvement Collaborative. So we've got 10 local authorities who all pool their intelligence and the resources to commission those services. And through doing that regional approach, we all, if you like, support each other in terms of quality assurance. So there's regular feedback. If anything is concerning with any child in the South East Wales area about one of those providers, that intelligence is fed back to all of the local authorities. So we pick up any issues that may not be apparent from a Torfaen perspective. The other thing we do is every time a child is placed out of county, he or she will have the same care plan that she would or he would experience if they were being supported at home. So they will have the same named social worker, all of the legislative processes in terms of undertaking regular reviews, an assessment of the risks, how are those risks being managed. Those social workers will travel to wherever that child is, and very often, in some occasions they could be in Scotland or north of England. We don't delegate that responsibility to wherever that placement actually is. We retain that responsibility, and that's our quality control. So that's how we retain that.
Thank you. Councillor Rees.
You seem to be suggesting that the Key Stage 2 results for our looked after children were very good compared to the rest of Wales. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, yeah, Key Stage 2 is 73.3%.
So are you aware that there is an issue around our Key Stage 2 assessments throughout all the schools in Torfaen? So is that something that we should really be relying on, or should we sort of be drilling down a bit more and finding out what's really going on?
Yeah, I'm absolutely aware of some of the issues we've had with some of our assessments, but these were based on actual results rather than predicted results. So I've got more confidence there than I would have if it had just been based on assessed results.
Members, any other questions? Councillor Mills?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Chair of the Corporate Parenting Panel, I think members might be concerned when you look at the graph, which shows that we have quite a high number of looked after children. But I just want to reassure members and let them know that at every single meeting we scrutinise those numbers and we emphasise that our aim
is to make sure that every child in Torvine is safe, rather than just trying to keep the number of looked after children down. And again, I know Sue has mentioned this on a number of occasions, but I just want to emphasise the fact that in 2013 I brought a motion to this council saying that it is mandatory for all elected members to undertake training, and that was unanimously accepted. And so therefore I am concerned that up to date only 32 members have attended, and can I encourage all members to attend, and can I encourage all members, when you take this booklet home, to actually read it. And again, can I remind everybody, being a corporate parent is not Sue Evans's responsibility, it is not Richard Clark's responsibility, it is not my sole responsibility as chair of this committee, it is everybody's responsibility.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sue, I notice, thank you for the report, by the way. I notice you've got a bullet point there is increasing pressure on in-house foster care provision. Could you expand on that a little bit more? And the second question is, are we getting people to apply for foster caring? And is there a process getting people to the end stage of being a foster carer? Is it adequate?
Thank you for that. The in-house provision and the stretch, if you like, is because of the numbers. So the more numbers you have, you're using your capacity of those foster carers who have already been validated, already been approved as fit for becoming a foster carer. And, you know, we are seeing that some of our complex children, particularly those who are entering teenage years, it's becoming more difficult to find foster parents with the skills, the ability, or sometimes even the physical space in their home to take another older child. So we're constantly trying to recruit new blood. We're pretty successful in Torvine. Again, when you compare us to other boroughs across Wales, we've got a pretty good recruitment and retention rate. But obviously, foster carers will age, so we're trying to, and will be less able to, look after very young children. So we're trying to constantly replenish that. Again, we're working with the South East Wales Improvement Collaborative to develop a regional marketing approach to try and attract new foster carers in from the borough. And that's a constant renewal process that we'll always be advertising and trying to find families. There is quite a strict process to go through, as you can imagine. We want the very best quality of people with parenting skills, because very often the children that they're looking after have higher needs maybe than the general child population. And we have to keep it at that high quality level. We don't want to reduce the quality there. So that does take time to get people trained and fit. I haven't got the details on the top of my head about how many are waiting or going through the system, but again, I can add that to a further iteration of this report.
Thank you, Sue. I would welcome that.
Councillor Yeovil.
Yeah. Going back to the queries of Councillor Morby and Councillor Rees, respectively, if either of you or both of you want to come and see me subsequently, and we'll try and arrange for a more comprehensive answer to both those questions. Turning to the remarks of Councillor Thomas this morning, earlier on rather, about the responsibility of school governors, before, and I echo that, before you can display your responsibility as a governor or in the role of governor, you first have to become a governor. And there are vacancies at lots of schools right throughout the borough, and there are some people in the auditorium today who are not governors of any school. I know who you are and you know who you are. I'm not going to name and shame anybody, but it would be nice if people started to reflect on what their duties and responsibilities are, and perhaps they would be a bit more measured and reasonable when they sally forth in any debate around issues like this and around any issue in education that reflects the issue of governors and school governors, when they are not and haven't been for some time governors themselves. I repeat, my door is open. Anybody that wants to become a governor who isn't currently a governor, and I'm more happy to furnish them with a governorship in a school in their locality. I appreciate with some people in their locality it might be difficult because of geographical circumstances, but we can surely bridge that gap as well.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clark.
Thank you, Chair. And hopefully, just by way of conclusion, I'd like to thank the members of the corporate parenting panel, not only the current members, which include myself, so technically I'm thanking myself, very conceited of me, but there are well-qualified past members sitting in the chamber today, so I would like to thank the work they do on behalf of us and recognise Ray in his role as the chairman. And as Ray quite rightly said, it's not just the few of us that sit there every so often, it is the privilege, as Gwenda Thomas put it, of all of us to be the parents of these children. Ray mentioned about the looked after children reported to every committee. I get it more frequently, and I am confident with the professionalism of our officers that those children on that are the necessary children. And on the point of the professionalism of our officers, at this given moment of time, considering recent circumstances, my thanks go to them for the excellent job that they do on our behalf in looking after the children within our community. It's a very stressful time, as you'll understand, at the current moment, and my thanks and considerations go towards their hard work.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It was just a quick question for Richard, I think. Given my colleague here on the left pointed out that only 32 of the elected members had attended the compulsory training, and we've got this booklet now. I did incidentally go on this training, and I am one of the Board of School Governors, but I wondered whether it would be worthwhile to hold another members' session for training and give the opportunity for those that haven't already had the training to attend, and for those of us who did to perhaps be brought up to date with recent developments.
Yes, as I've said in the report, we're already planning what I'm calling mop-up sessions for this year, and we will be actively targeting the people who we know haven't been, but for other people who have been, you may want a refresher.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Sue. The recommendation is on page 196 of your agenda. We are asked to note the contents of the report and the appendix. Can I have a show of hands, please? Everyone for? Thank you, members. I think that's unanimous. The report and appendix are noted. Thank you. Agenda item 11, Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Appointment of Statutory Co-optee. Tom Roberts, Senior Corporate Improvement and Scrutiny Officer. Can you present your report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll attempt to be very brief. Members will recall that recently 3 vacancies arose within the Learning Overview and Scrutiny Committee, then being the parent governor representatives. Members will also recall in December this council approved 2 appointments, the secondary and the Welsh parent governor representatives. We now have a 3rd nominee for the primary representative. Details are within the report, and the recommendation I put to you is to approve the nomination. That's it.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments? Councillor Morby?
Yeah, it's disappointing that only one person responded to the invitation to governors within Torfaen to attend or to volunteer to go onto the scrutiny committee. I understand the process was largely led by the EAS, who sent out an email in October with a closing date after about 2 weeks. I just wonder whether it would have been better to have persisted, obviously not our responsibility, but the EAS's responsibility, to try and get more people volunteering. I'm not opposing what's happened. Indeed, if the only person who has expressed an interest is happy to do it, then that's very welcome. But it would have been I think, better for everybody, for more people to express an interest. And perhaps a suggestion could be made to the EAS in future that when such a vacancy arises, that they need to be a bit more persistent in securing more volunteers or more expressions of interest. Thanks.
I think as and when vacancies arise, we will look at how we go about filling them to get a wider breadth of response.
Okay, thank you, Tom. The recommendations are on page 204 of your agenda. We are asked to note the procedure followed and appoint Lorna Redmond to the vacant co-optee position on the committee. Can I have a show of hands, please? Everyone for? Okay, thank you, members. I think that's unanimous. The recommendations are agreed. We move on to agenda item 12, Greater Gwent Torfaen Pension Fund, establishment of a local pension board. Graham Russell, Head of Human Resources and Pensions, can you present your report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Torfaen is the administering authority for the local government pension scheme in South East Wales, and as such, within the fund that we administer, there are some 50 plus organisations with over 51,000 members in it, be they active contributors into the fund as current employees of councils or smaller employers, or whether they are deferred pensioners or whether they are actually pensioners drawing benefit from the fund. The fund that we operate at the moment is just over £2 billion in order to provide for the benefits of those 50,000 or so members. Governance of the pension funds is set out by regulation, and the Council has previously delegated that responsibility to the Pensions Committee. This matter is, however, the reason for this report is because Pensions Committee cannot determine this particular new development. Governance arrangements vary at a national level, so that different local government pension schemes will have slightly different arrangements in how they administer their funds. We have a fully constituted Pensions Committee, which is supported by a wider body, the Pension Fund Management Group, which has been in place for a good number of years, providing advice and challenge to the Pensions Committee. However, what's happened is that there has been a new act, the Public Sector Pensions Act, introduced in 2013, and this has set out more clearly what is required of local government pension scheme administering authorities. And what we are required to do is to establish a local pensions board, and that's set out in the Act and is then supplemented and expanded upon by local government pension scheme regulations and guidance issued by National Board for the LGPS. The purpose of this board is not decision-making. It is an overview role and a scrutiny role, and it is designed to assist the administering authority to ensure that what the Pensions Committee does is in accordance with regulations, in accordance with law, and in accordance with anything that the pensions regulator dictates. The secondary purpose is also to ensure the effective and efficient governance arrangements of the pension fund. So it will work, hopefully, in harmony with the Pensions Committee and will provide perhaps a healthy challenge, on occasions perhaps a tension, in order to make sure that the administration and the governance of the fund is being properly undertaken. So this report seeks Council approval to set up that local pension board as required by regulations. There are some key points that need to be considered. The pension board has to have equal representation from employers and from members. So that isn't to say that the member representatives have to come say, all from trade unions or all from pensioner bodies, but they need to be representative and have the ability to represent that stakeholder group. Equally, the employer representatives could come from any of the 50 organisations within the fund. So there is an anticipation that most of these people on the new pensions board will come from outside of the council. Representatives have to have appropriate capacity to be able to attend the meetings, but just as importantly, to undertake training and develop knowledge and skills around pensions generally, and specifically around the local government pension scheme. So there's quite a learning curve for those who wish to come onto the boards. There are other issues around conflicts of interest, around then being able to determine your own procedural arrangements within guidance, and also there is a requirement to be open and transparent in terms of inviting nominations to be part of the pensions board. It's also possible to co-opt others onto a pensions board. So they may not be there as a nomination of an employer or an employee, or rather an employer or a member representative, but you can co-opt others on. And that will bring additional knowledge and expertise to bear on the pensions board. What the report sets out, and what the largest part of the report is about, is setting up the terms of reference and the proposals of how the pensions board would operate. Originally, it was suggested that we would set up a board with 3 member representatives and 3 employer representatives, plus 1 independent chair. In consultation with the trade unions, who wanted to see a wider representation, we have expanded that to a proposal in the report of 5 and 5 plus an independent chair. We recognise that that's probably slightly out of kilter with some other pension schemes, because there are something like 89 funds throughout the country setting these things up. They tend to be going for slightly smaller panels. But I'd like to think we've worked well, have a good relationship with trade unions, and we wanted to try and recognise some of the points that they were bringing forward in consultation with them. So this report proposes a pensions board of 11 in total, 5 member reps, 5 employer reps, plus an independent chair. It's also suggesting that the appointment process is via an open advert, nominations from invited bodies such as trade unions, and other expressions of interest. Many of the operational aspects will be the same as any other committee of the council, but it's not set up under the same legislation. So that they will be open meetings, they will meet probably 4 times a year, and that will be coordinated with the timing of the meeting of the Pensions Committee, and they will produce an annual report. There is one particular point that I wish to bring to your attention in terms of the way the setup is proposed. I've already indicated that the size of the board has been increased as a result of consultation with Unison, who made strong representations that they feel that they are well positioned as a trade union to provide appropriate representation to members within the pension fund. We've increased the size of the representation from 3 on each side to 5 on each side. But Unison have also suggested that what we should be looking to do is simply appoint the member representatives directly from the trade unions. And they have asked us to consider that and bring that to your attention for your consideration. Now, I previously said that what we were looking to do is to have as open and transparent a process as possible. We've also factored in something which indicates that it's more than likely that a majority of those member representatives will come from trade unions, because they do have the capability of a very strong network to feed back to and to harness views from. So there is an expectation and almost a guarantee in the way this is written that the majority of members will come from trade unions, but it would seem slightly at odds with the openness and transparency of the process of nomination to actually go straight for simple nomination direct from trade unions. So that is an issue that Council are just asked to express a view on, and that issue is highlighted in paragraph 4.2. The unions are also slightly nervous about an independent chair, although I have to say the research we've done is that will be extensive and common practice across most of the 89 funds in England and Wales. And that is about bringing some immediate expertise, knowledge and skills to help guide the committee. It's important to say the independent chair will not have any sort of vote. It is only the employer reps and the member reps who will have a vote. And as members of this pension board trying to assist in the governance, the role is not necessarily to represent their stakeholder group. Their role is to act in the best interests of the pension fund. So once they are there and as a representative of a nominated group, they are there to act in the best interests of the fund, not part as just a one faction or another. So it's designed to be more collegiate to try and ensure that the governance standards of the pension fund are met and are sufficient. So there are two recommendations for you as a council. One is to agree the process and the terms of reference to establish the pensions board. And the second point is to express your view in terms of how you would wish to see the nomination and selection, whether it be a wider process or whether it be a direct nomination by trade unions. Although I do, as I have done, I refer to the point that that could be seen, it would exclude certain other categories of member being represented, but whether those categories of member have the ability and the infrastructure to represent a wide stakeholder group is probably the matter to consider. So I'll leave it there, Madam Mayor, unless there are any questions from members.
Thank you, Graham. Members, is there any questions or comments? Councillor Morby?
Could I just ask about the trade union representation? Would it be possible for somebody who is a retired member of a trade union to be included within the nominations, even if made by a trade union?
Yes, it will be.
And, sorry, to follow up, could we make that a proviso within our recommendation?
You could do. I would say there isn't necessarily a need to, because what's designed here is an open process anyway, so that those sorts of individuals could be nominated by the trade union, and there's no restriction at all on that happening.
Councillor Hunt?
Jane, speaking on this, I'd like to pay tribute to Mary and the Pensions Committee for the work they do on this issue. I'd also like to agree with the point that Graham makes about the independent chair. However, drawing your attention to page 209, 4.02, I would suggest that we adopt the suggestion at 3.08 that employee representatives are nominated by the trade unions, as with other local arrangements, and in line with our commitment to working as partners with the trade unions. Can I move that?
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. So all those in favour? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? thank you, members. The recommendations in the report are agreed. Thank you, Graham. We'll move on to agenda item 13, the Localism Act 2011 Pay Policy Statement. I'd like to bring Linda in now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I can just explain to members that every year the Council is required to present its pay policy statement to Council for approval, and the statement sets out how the Council pays its staff. This year the Council is also being asked to approve a pay award, a nationally agreed pay award for its chief officers. But regulations also require that increase is also approved by Council, and therefore it would then fit in the pay policy. And it raises the issues of whether those chief officers affected by that should remain in the chamber while councillors debate and vote on that award. Members will be aware of circumstances in other councils where there's been wide publicity about the difficulty this might have caused. And although the officers are not decision makers in this chamber, we have to manage, or I have to manage, giving advice to those officers, and also balancing that against the advice that councillors need from officers if they have any questions on the pay policy, etc. The Chief Executive is not affected by the pay award. So what I would ask is that members agree that the head of HR and pensions, who is affected, actually stay and advise and answer questions, whilst the other chief officers who are affected withdraw. Councillor Anthony Hunt will present that report. So, members, if I could ask you to specifically agree that Graham Russell, as head of HR, stay to help you with that. The other chief officers affected will withdraw. The Deputy Monitoring Officer will take my place, and then you can debate and make a decision on the pay policy.
Move on.
Thank you, Officer.
Everyone agreed? Yes. Thank you, members. Councillor Hunt, would you like to present this report for us, please?
Okay, I'll present this report as concisely as I can. You'll see at page 237, it takes us through what is essentially it's a statement of the existing situation rather than a change of anything specifically. The only changes that are referred to in this paper are the National Chief Officer Pay Award, the Salisbury Pay Award, that's been agreed in the last few days. So we're not departing from anything national here. I'll draw your attention to the tables in 6.3, which both show the ratios of Chief Officer pay to median pay, which is something we've been working on trying to keep down. Also, the numbers of officers on Chief Officer grades, which you'll see as well if you look at excluding the shared posts, has consistently declined over the last 4 years. Obviously, there's a bit of a conflict between the two, because if you have fewer chief officers covering larger areas of responsibility, then that is likely to push that ratio up. But the effort we've been making is to keep it down. So really, I'll just take you to the recommendations that we approve the 2015 pay policy statement on page 240 at 7.1 for the purposes of publication under the Localism Act. So if anyone's got any questions for either myself or for Graham on that, then you're welcome to. As Linda referred to, this is a sensitive issue because of things that have happened in other councils outside of the national sphere. But this is quite a bland statement here about the existing situation and is not reflecting any decisions that we've taken locally to do anything above and beyond that.
Members, are there any questions or comments? Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is sitting really uncomfortably with me. How I vote will have no reflection on what I think of our officers, because I think they do a sterling job in a decreasing pool of officers. But I'm battling with this one here because it's pay increases. Whilst everything else is being cut, I'm battling with that, and I just think that I need to put that into the arena there.
No other members, questions, comments? No. Councillor Hunt, do you want to come back in?
There are no pay increases within this document. The only pay increase is the national pay award that's been made across all staff, and the Salisbury Award that's been made nationally to chief officers. So we're not giving our chief officers any pay rise as such. It's just the national negotiator position as is, and there's not any pay increases or change of pay policy in here. It's more, if I'm right, a reflection of the existing situation. If I can have some clarity on that.
Thank you. If I can just add to that, there was a 2.2% pay award announced for the majority of staff towards the back end of last year, and that was that was incorporated within the budget at the time of preparation. So it was provided for and has previously been agreed. It is part of the national negotiations that we are part of. For the first time in 6 years, there has then been a proposal for the chief officers nationally to have a 2% pay increase, and that is what is included within here. The Salisbury grades, which are shown at Appendix B of the paper, that has only been agreed within the past few days. So what you will see in this report is the old rates, but there has been a national pay award agreed, and if you were to agree this, I would suggest that Appendix B is updated to just include that national pay award, which is again 2.2% from March 2015, but covering a period of about 16 months through to August 2016. So that's the position with those national pay awards, which form part of employees' terms and conditions of employment.
Any other questions, comments? No. Councillor Barnett.
Yes, I think we must take note of the point that's already been made, that because of savings made elsewhere with departmental structures, we have heads of departments, etc. now, and heads of service that are combining roles that formerly were done by two separate individuals. And the point has already been made that we have excellent officers, but we also need to hang on to those excellent officers. And what what the report is asking is that we honour these J&C negotiated terms, etc. And fall within, the same scope as other authorities. Or we could find that some of our most able, and those we can least spare, might be headhunted elsewhere.
Thank you. Councillor Harnett. Okay, the recommendations shown on page 240 of your agenda. We are asked to approve the 2015 pay policy statement attached to the report as an accurate summary of the Council's current policy for publication under the Localism Act. Can I have a show of hands, please? Everyone for? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Thank you, members. The recommendations are agreed. We move on to agenda item 14, member question time. Oh yeah, can we call the officers back in? Thank you, Graham. Agenda item 14 is member question time. Can I remind members that any supplementary questions must relate to the primary questions and they must not be statements. They should be questions. Okay? Thank you. Before we start, we're clear? Right. We wait. Okay, Councillor Hugh Bevan, would you like to ask the first question, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This follows on from a question I put to Councillor Cunningham, the executive member, last year, when it became apparent the extent of the backlog with for essential highways maintenance, and it was pertinent at the time because the funding was going from the Welsh Government. 2014 was the last year, I believe, that the funding was available from the Welsh Government. I wrote a letter to the Minister of Transport, Edwina Hart, and she sent me a reply, a copy of which I've forwarded on to the executive member. I did put this as one group of questions, but it's been split down into three.
Can we ask a question,
yes, certainly.
please?
Okay. I was just going to say that if the executive member wanted to give me one response to address all three questions, I would accept that because this has been broken down into three separate questions, but that's fine. Okay, of the £170 million the Minister says that had been spent by the Welsh Government on highway improvements over the last 3 years under the Local Government Borrowing Initiative, how much of this has come to Torfaen County Borough Council?
Councillor Cunningham, the executive member for Neighbourhoods, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, well, as you said, Councillor Bevan, over the past 3 years we were able to borrow £3.51 million through the Local Government Borrowing Initiative. The monies allocated to each authority area are proportionate to the length and size of the highway asset. It is disappointing that WAG has withdrawn this funding from April 2015. It's important to note, of course, that that money is not just for resurfacing, it's for bridges, structures, culverts, etc., and street lighting.
Councillor Bevan, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. There's no supplementary on that.
Thank you. Councillor John Cunningham, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a question to the leader, actually. That I'm extremely concerned that's been reported to me by officers of the council. Pardon? I'm sorry, it's the microphone. It's been reported to me by officers of the council that a member of the public is acting as a pseudo-private investigator and visiting construction sites of Torfaen County Borough Council and questioning contractors on their working practices and also filming them at work. Has the leader any knowledge that this is taking place, and has this individual any status to do this, and who, if anyone, has commissioned him to do so?
Leader, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I understand that the week before last, a local Torfaen resident attended our construction sites on 2 occasions and approached our contractors. The contractors claimed the entry to the site was without permission, as was the filming, and I understand a recording was made and handed to an independent councillor. I've asked the officers to look at this and determine what action is appropriate, if any. For members' information, the construction site in Trefethin is a safe routes in the community, what we used to know as a safe routes to school. That project is funded by the Welsh Assembly.
You've got a supplementary, Councillor Cunningham? Okay, thank you. Councillor Kemp, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. On the 7th of May 2014, I submitted a request to the Neighbourhood Department by officers notifying them that I would like to undertake a full voluntary shift with the recycling crew team during the forthcoming winter season. Notwithstanding the fact that I have sent further reminder emails and held a face-to-face conversation with officers covering the month of November 2014 and January 2015, I have as yet not been given this opportunity. Despite officers' previous encouragement for councillors to go out with a waste crew team. Would the executive member for neighbourhoods give an explanation as to why it is taking so long for my request to be carried out?
Councillor John Cunningham, Executive Member for Neighbourhoods, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Kemp went out with the crews last spring, summer, and asked again in November 2014 to go out again in the winter months. He asked to go out in January and with the same crew on the same day as previously, so he could see the difference between summer and winter working. We've been trying to arrange this for him, but it's proved difficult because of the fluidity of the staff who we move around from round to round to ensure that all rounds can go ahead. We've been in contact with him about this and explained the reasons why it hasn't been arranged yet, and we will soon be giving him some date options. As members will appreciate, we do encourage members to see the waste operation firsthand, but our first priority has to be ensuring that we have sufficient crews to man all rounds and catching up after holiday periods and bad weather, when a number of the waste drivers are pulled off collections in order to undertake gritting duties.
Councillor Kemp, do you have a supplementary?
I can update Councillor Cunningham with a response, if like. It is a short response, but it is a positive one, if that's okay. I'm pleased to say that following the deadline for my members' question of last Thursday at 10 o'clock.
Out of order, Madam Mayor. I think you made it perfectly clear before we went into the question time that they had to be questions. And Councillor Kemp doesn't seem to understand that.
No, okay. Then I will put forward my supplementary question, knowing the extensive time delay that it has taken to carry out my wish, and how quick arrangements can be made if inclined to do so. What departmental changes have been put in place to ensure that this sort of issue does not reoccur again?
Well, I wasn't aware of your request to go out again at this time, and I think this really is an inappropriate question to ask council. Actually, it's a domestic issue. You should have sorted that with me some other time, not bring it to council. I was not aware of it until the council question came forward. But obviously, our priority is to provide the service, not to manufacture the service around the actual members. So we'll do our best to accommodate members who've made this request, but it's not always possible to respond quickly.
Thank you. Councillor Maria Graham, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to Councillor Richard Clark. There seems to be a worrying increase in the level of self-harm amongst children and young people. What is this authority doing to support those in crisis and stop this terrible practice? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Graham. Self-harm is recognised by the Safeguarding Board, and the Welsh Government is currently consulting on a strategy called Talk to Me Too, which concludes this Friday. The proposed strategy has the following 6 objectives: awareness raising, responses to crisis and early intervention, information and support for the bereaved, supporting the media in responsible reporting, reducing access to the means of suicide, supporting learning information and monitoring systems to improve understanding of suicide and self-harm. Part of the proposed action plan is the development and delivery of a Wales framework for training of professionals, individuals who frequently come into contact with people at risk of suicide or self-harm, and the general public. As members of the South East Wales Safeguarding Board, relevant officers from both education and social care will be part of the necessary work that will come out of the national strategy. Currently, the Education Service aims to support children and young people with accessing the emotional help they need in order to divert them from hurting themselves. It has recently raised awareness within schools and promoted the handling issues of self-harm and thoughts of suicide in young people's guidance, as produced by the former 5 local safeguarding boards. Children and young people also have access to pastoral care support in schools, and in addition to this, schools respond to any concerns by making referrals as necessary to social services. Schools also contribute to the multi-agency approach in providing support, and also utilise the Torfaen Schools counselling service as necessary, which is available to all children within our schools. In social care, our children and family services do recognise self-harming behaviours, and we aim to support children and young people with access and the emotional help that they need in order to divert from them hurting themselves. There is a There is a useful leaflet from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which I'll send to all members with the reply to this question, and I'll put the little link on the end.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, do you have a supplementary? No? Okay, thank you. Councillor Rees, would you like?
Does the Leader agree with the Labour Minister for Public Services that council chambers must reflect the population of Wales in all its diversity?
Thank you for that. Yes, I do. I'm a big supporter of diversity. In fact, I spoke at the launch of the report. By the way, the first diversity report was Leslie Griffiths', not Leighton Andrews. So I spoke at the first launch on increasing diversity into local government in March last year with Leslie Griffiths and Professor Laura McAllister, who was the author of the report. I support the concept of having more black people, more ethnic minorities, and indeed young people. In fact, and I need to say this so that members understand, the reason why David Daniels is there is directly as a consequence of that report, where they asked us to bring younger members to the forefront. And that's exactly what I've done. Following that launch, by the way, I took about 7 members from this council with me to launch it at the Senedd. And some of those members can vouch for this. But one of the key things they were after is they wanted young representation. It's all very well having young councillors on the council, but the request from their point of view was to have young councillors on the cabinet so that the youth of this community is recognised and given an opportunity to express their opinion. So, of course I do.
The race, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, I congratulate you on that decision. It was a brave decision and well done. But now we need to go a little bit further. And as the annual general meeting is upon us, and it is in your power to change the composition of the cabinet, would you consider further reflecting the diversity of people in Torfaen? I'm thinking especially of women. And will you act?
What happens every year at every AGM is people give consideration to the talents and the abilities of people there, and then make a decision accordingly, and I'm sure we'll do that this year.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan, your second question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In relation to highway maintenance, the Minister asserts that local authorities adopt best practice asset management techniques, and that it was envisaged local authorities would also develop sustainable asset management plans using their own resources going forwards. How is this going to be achieved within Torfaen?
Councillor Cunningham.
You mentioned earlier on, Councillor Ben, about the letter you had from the Minister. I didn't really say too much, I don't think, did it? I think it covered a multitude of sins. But my response to this particular question, that we have adopted an agreed highway asset management plan, which runs from 2013 until 2018, and we've been using this to address the planned maintenance issues highlighted by the various condition surveys carried out on all sections of the highway assets, and that includes carriageways, as I mentioned earlier, footways, structures and drainage. We inspect and maintain the highway network to ensure it is in a safe and serviceable condition in accordance with this particular plan.
Supplementary, Councillor Bevan.
Yes, I do on that particular point, actually, because my interpretation, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, my interpretation of the Minister's letter was that there wasn't going to be any future funding being made available to us as a local authority. Am I incorrect in assuming that?
You're correct, but you've asked that in the next question, I think. You've referred to that in the next question.
Okay, Councillor Kemp, would you like to ask your second question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Welsh Government data indicates that 30% of Torfaen residents, or second from bottom to all 22 unitary authorities across Wales, feel unsafe when walking in their local area after dark. As Leighton Andrews Assembly Member Assembly Member and Minister for Public Services indicates that local authorities should be working with key partners in order to reduce crime and the fear of crime. Would the Executive Member for Housing, Planning and Public Protection give a statement in regard to what Torfaen County Borough Council is currently doing to help make local communities a safer place to live?
I believe Councillor David Daniels, Executive Member for Communities, is answering this question.
Yeah, you're stuck with me. Sorry, Rob. Thanks for the question. Sorry, it might be a bit long, so bear with me. The Council works with a number of partners to reduce the incidence of reported antisocial behaviour, and by association, this reduces crime and fear of crime both night and day. This key partnership activity that takes place on a regular basis. Over the last 3 years, we've seen incidents of reported antisocial behaviour drop from 5,600 recorded incidents in 2011-2012 to 4,373 recorded incidents in 2013-2014. Partnership activity contributing to this reduction includes working with schools to introduce multi-agency pupil intervention meetings that ensure that those young people at risk of committing crime and antisocial behaviour are engaged at the earliest possible opportunity. Partners include Prevent, the Lift Project, Youth Offending Service, Youth Service, Police and Community Safety. Multi-agency problem-solving groups take place as requested across a range of partners and organisations to address the issues of concern. Supporting early intervention clinics set up to deal with those young people who have continued to engage in low-level antisocial behaviour. Clinics are held by Community Safety, Police, Youth Offending Team and Youth Service and are held at the local police station. There has been a huge success rate with the clinic, with a very small percentage of young people progressing further in the antisocial behaviour reduction process. Supporting the delivery of antisocial behaviour contracts between the person and local authority, the young person will be supported by the Youth Offending Service and must attend sessions with a support worker to look at a way to address their behaviour. Regular partnership meetings with the Police Crime and Antisocial Behaviour Reduction Officer and Police Ward Managers, shift officers, who are out in the field to address and support reducing incidents of antisocial behaviour. Support to prevention referrals, whereby Torfaen Youth Service will work with young people to obtain an accredited qualification around their compulsory units to address their behaviour and continue their engagement to positive attitudes. Targeted diversionary outreach and detached work through the Youth Service, Police and Community Safety teams to target areas of higher antisocial behaviour activity. Referrals to tenancy support to support families whose tenancies could be at risk due to antisocial behaviour activities of the household to address the issues and prevent homelessness. Direct referrals to the Youth Offending Service prevention team for specific work to addressing higher levels of antisocial behaviour activity, addressing substance misuse, antisocial behaviour, mental health and parenting. Referrals to Families First to support families where young people are engaged in antisocial behaviour. The Youth Offending Service, in conjunction with the police, have developed the Bureau model in order to meet some of the requirements of Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act, LASPO, and in order to deal with and manage out-of-court disposals. This model has led to effective decision-making following assessment of young people and is aimed at ensuring the right services are provided at the right time in order to prevent continued offending. This model was implemented in April 2013 and aims to have continued positive impact on reducing the first-time entrance into the criminal justice system. The Council, through its Planning and Public Protection Service, also contributes towards reducing crime and fear of crime by the introduction of resident-led cold calling control zones to empower residents to turn people away and feel safer in their environment. There is a host of preventative partnership activity undertaken between the Council and its partners that help reduce crime and fear of crime. We will continue to work proactively with partners in this important activity area, and I trust my reply answers Councillor Kemp's question. I'd just like to add to that, although there's a lot of action in there relating to young people, this is by no means an indication that young people are attributable for the most of the crime that goes on in the borough. It just so happens that this is very good prevention work that stems any future progression throughout, antisocial behaviour.
I'd very much appreciate a thorough response, and because it is thorough, I would appreciate if you could send me a hard copy if possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rees.
Leader, Cardiff Capital Region Board, on which the Leader sits, recently published a report powering the Welsh economy. Please would the Leader update the Council on the outcome of this report?
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Rees. I'll speak directly into the mics because we've been talking, before I give the answer, for many, many months and years now about this mic system. We really need to look at it, actually. Anyway, Cardiff Capital Region Board, on which Councillor Rees raises a valuable point regarding the recently published report and the need for me to update members. Rather than provide the Council with a short summary on a complex matter, though I've been working on towards the establishment of a members' seminar at the Conference Theatre in Cwmbran. Professor Kevin Morgan has agreed to lead the session, and I intend to invite elected members from the 5 former grant authorities to explore the proposals fully. Let me just say that in the very onset of the setting up of Cardiff City Region, it was agreed that there was a need to go out and consult members and alert members and inform members about the direction they're going. So, yeah, I will do that, and I'll come back to you, and as long as that's cleared, we will have a session, and I'll invite people from Blaenau Gwent, from Monmouth, from Newport, and from Caerphilly to join us.
To your invitees, could you also invite Anne Bynan?
I will do, but Anne Bynan actually sits on the Cardiff Capital Region Board, but I got no problem with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hugh Bevan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is for Councillor Cunningham again. What measures will be undertaken to reduce the £30 million backlog in essential highway maintenance?
Right, as you know, the highway asset is a deteriorating asset. We're all complaining about it, as the amount of investment, even including the LGBI borrowing, is below the levels required to address any backlog of the highway asset. Officers continue to work with others across South East Wales to make the case for further local government borrow initiative funding with the Welsh Assembly Government. An executive member, I'm fully aware of the condition of the highway asset, and I will continue to lobby WAG for increased funding. When I have this opportunity, of course, corporately it is recognised that additional funding is required for highways, and the budget of 2015-16 does provide for the continuation of highways LGBI, capital investment support for highways, to a similar level as the last 3 years, despite the Welsh Government ending their funding support. What the Council proposed to do is, on the Highways Local Government Borrow Initiative, there is no provision within the final settlement in respect of the continuation of the Highways LGBI to provide some capital provision for roads. As part of their initial budget, Construction Neighbourhood Services included the provision of £100,000 to allow the continuation of 2015-16. That's always been there, the £100,000. So it is proposed that this funding elsewhere, we'll fund this elsewhere, and to enable neighbourhoods to mitigate an emerging pressure around capital fees without requiring further impact upon frontline services. The essence of that, we're going to use that £100,000 to borrow £1 million, which we will pay back over the next 10 years out of our own funds.
Supplementary, Councillor Bevan.
Just like to thank the executive member for his response and say, could I have a copy in writing, please?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you. In February 2015, the Welsh Government published its Local Authority Services Performance 2013-14 document. Unfortunately, measuring indicator number 4, what do people think of local authority services, showed that only approximately 51% of interviewed respondents felt that Torfaen County Borough Council provided a high-quality service. And as a consequence, the council has been placed in the worst performing quarter and 20th out of the 22 unitary authorities across Wales. Would the leader of the council give a statement in regard to what has gone wrong to warrant being placed in the worst performing quarter, and agree to hold a members' seminar where he can explain to members how the council's quality of service will be improved?
Thank you for that, Councillor Kemp. The first two-thirds of that question is not on the sheet here. I mean, Madam Mayor, you need to make sure that, well, not the sheet I've got, it's not. Right. Thank you for your question. I think before I answer it, there are probably a few things I should point out by way of context. Firstly, the question raised is based on data that has been in the public domain since 2014 and relates to the perception of the public during 2013-14. The fieldwork for the survey began in April 2013, almost 2 years ago. With this in mind, I'd suggest the data is used with a degree of caution due to it being somewhat historic in nature. The second point I'd like to raise is that 51% of Torvine respondents who felt that felt in 2013-14 that Torvine provided high quality of services was a 9% increase in our previous year's results. This improvement was the second largest increase in this indicator across the whole of Wales, and comes at a time when over a third of councils lost ground on the 2012-2013 positions. I think I would also ask members to note that the question relates specifically to the provision of high quality services. Not good quality or okay quality services, but high quality. I'm sure that members will recognise that in the age of austerity, the Council's desire and ability to deliver high-quality services continues to be threatened. With that in mind, a rise of 9% across the year against a challenging reduction in budget should be recognised as a good progress rather than be seen as an indication of going wrong. In response to the latter part of Councillor Kemp's question, however, I think a seminar may be a good idea. It will allow the Council to reaffirm to members the published levels of performances and for members to engage in discussion around why the public perception of the quality of services may differ.
Member Kemp, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you for your response. I look forward to attending the seminar in due course.
Thank you, members. Next agenda item 15 is the date of the next meeting. For your information, it will take place on the 14th of April at 10 a.m. in the Council Chamber. Agenda item 16, Cabinet decisions on 10th of February 2015. Members, the Cabinet decisions start on page 263. There were no challenges to the decisions. Do members have any questions on any of the decisions? No? All okay to note the decisions? Yes? Thank you, members. The Cabinet decisions are noted. That's the end of the Council meeting. Thank you for your attendance.